So, I was on this site for teenagers 13 through 19 where it was a little like Tinder in terms of swiping, but it really wasn't. I did end up meeting some cool people there though. There's a verification they do so that only teens can use it, but they do it with pictures. I was 14 when I was using this app. So I met this guy, Dimitri, and his thing said he was 17. He didn't look the greatest, not at all, but it's not like I was gonna date him or whatever. I just wanted a new friend. We got to talking. He moved over to Snapchat and Skype since the app was kinda buggy. Then we got to late night talks. I started telling him a story. We eventually started role-playing with those characters, and Dimitri was clearly trying to get the two into a sexual act. Obviously, this was making me uncomfortable. I don't want to roleplay a sexual scene with the dude. Why can't our cool magic boys hate each other? So I finished the story my way, despite all of his attempts to bring it over his way, and moved on. He pressured me into a lot of pictures. Not sexual, just pictures, but it was still uncomfortable. He asked for a lot of photos. He also pressured me into Skype calls, but I only did that twice because I was too uncomfortable with it. Now, I would be fine with this, like, it's really not a big deal. But then, we're talking, and what does he say? I wish you were older. If I dated you now, I would be in trouble. I was low-key confused. A 14-year-old and a 17-year-old? That isn't illegal per se. It only becomes bad if, well, I didn't verbalize this. I was more focused on bringing the conversation back to normal. He then says, quote, I can't believe someone as amazing as you would hang out with an almost 30-year-old man. When I read that, oh boy, he always looked a bit older, but I didn't know he was 30. This was a huge shocker to me. What do? Do I chalk it up to a typo? Maybe he put the wrong number in. It must have meant almost 20, right? Why didn't he correct it? Well, obviously he didn't notice, or he expected me to realize he meant 20. This was the first relationship I had in a while, so I was scared to end it unless there were really a reason to. I was too much of a shy guy back then to make any friends. We started playing Truth or Dare, and he started asking sexual truths. Now, I still thought he was a teenager, like me, so I literally couldn't care less about this. However, he asked me what one of my sexual kinks was. I told him I liked being called a certain thing, and then he started calling me that. I was trying to bring it up to him and tell him, hey, this is fucking creepy, don't do it. But again, I was a shy guy. Then he mentioned that he was going to his parents' house. I asked him if he had a house of his own. He said yes, like not a dorm thing at a college place, a proper house. At 17, nope. He had to be lying. We had moved to Discord by now, so I just told him I was deleting the other stuff, which I did, and now my online/offline status ball thing is set to offline 24/7 because I don't want to be rude by ignoring him whilst I'm online or blocking him without explanation, but I also don't want to speak to him because speaking to him after such a long time just to tell him I'm blocking him is rude, so I guess this is my life now. I was going to report him to the site, but it seems he's already been removed. So creepy guy who's definitely not 17 like you advertise, please take the hint so I can put my online/offline thing back to normal and never talk to me again. Cheers. "6 years ago, I was a new mom, learning to balance my job, family, and health. My social life primarily existed on the internet at this time, and Facebook and Instagram were the main ways I kept in contact with others. I received a friend request from Steven, an old friend from high school. I accepted, and everything was normal for a while. After a couple of months, Steven sent me a DM asking how I was. The conversation was fine, but it didn't take too long for me to realize that this wasn't the Steven I knew. They had the same first and common last name. His profile picture was not a picture of himself, so I never realized it was a different person. Either way, we had several mutual friends, and he didn't do anything especially creepy, so I left him on my friends list. He would occasionally message and chat, and he just seemed like someone that was a bit socially awkward but harmless. I would respond, and kept conversations brief. One day, I got a text from him, which surprised me because I never gave him my number. I asked how he had gotten my number, and he said it was from my website, which was fair. I am an artist and had my email and phone number listed on my art site. He began texting several times a day, and I would give short responses followed with something like, "At work, talk to you later," or "Dinner with the fam, have a good evening." He started talking about his new boyfriend, saying that he was one of the few gay conservatives, and things were going well. I told him I'm glad that he has a partner that aligns with him and wished them well. He then began talking a lot about conservative politics and was aggressive about it, and I told him I was a liberal, so it was probably best we didn't have those conversations. His messages began turning sexual, where he would ask if I wanted to hear about the sex parties him and his boyfriend threw. I told him no. I didn't really know him, and it was inappropriate. One day I was busy with work and returned to my phone to see dozens of messages from him, angry that I wasn't responding, and he went on and on sharing very graphic sexual stories. I responded and told him I'd been polite to him because he seemed like he didn't have many friends, but this was too much and I was going to block him. I told him that I didn't believe he was gay, and he was just saying it in an attempt to make me think he's harmless. I proceeded to block him on social media, and I blocked his phone number. A couple of days later, I started getting lots of friends requests from accounts that I didn't have mutuals with, and no friends on them. I knew they were probably fake pages that he was creating. I would block them and then move on. Then I began getting phone calls and texts from the fake numbers. Same thing, I would block them and move on. I messaged our mutuals to ask how they knew about him, and none of them knew him. He had just requested them and they accepted. He began sending requests to my friends, family, and other women in my dance troupe. I let everyone know that they needed to block him. For months, not a day passed that I would not get a weird call or friend request or DM. It would range from a normal "how are you" to vague threats of "I could make you talk to me if I really wanted to." He lived several hours away, so I wasn't particularly concerned. Things got quieter, until one evening my notifications started going off like crazy. My phone was ringing with unknown numbers. It was on my art page. Probably 15 different accounts had posted sexual content on my page, or things saying I'm a whore, or is a thief. I knew it was from him because he also accidentally posted from his real account. I didn't realize that I never blocked him from that page. He also sent a message to my art page saying sorry for that, and he misses his friend, and he was just trying to get my attention. I didn't respond. I blocked him and called the police. Since stalking and harassment laws are awful, they didn't do anything. Later that night, I woke up around 2 a.m. for no reason other than I was just having trouble sleeping. I was up for a while playing on my phone when I started hearing a strange sound coming from the living room. It was back and forth between quiet cracking and scratching. At the time, we lived in a large ranch house, and the living room was on the other end of a long hall. I got up, thinking that my cats were into something or maybe after a mouse. I flicked on the living room light and the sound stopped. I scanned around looking for my cats when I noticed an open window. Our windows were large, from floor to ceiling, and opened by pulling them down from the top. The top of the window sill had pry marks and the lock was broken. Thankfully, this house was old and the windows did not open easily, and he had only been able to open it about 8 inches. I woke my husband up, got my son out of his room, and called the police. I knew it was Steven. It was too big of a coincidence that he blew up that day, and then someone tries to break into my house at the middle of the night. We couldn't prove it was him. There was no evidence other than what happened that day that pointed to him. The police spoke to him, and I believe that it scared him enough to leave me alone. I was obviously horrified at the time, and I began looking up anything I could find out about him. I wound up finding his YouTube channel, which solidified my fears for him even more. He posted rants, where he would get angry and angry until he was red-faced and nearly spitting. He frequently talked about violence and would show off his gun collection. This led me to finding his real last name. I googled his name and found out that he had been arrested 2 years prior for holding a woman against her will in a hotel room. Thankfully, she was able to escape with only a bloody lip. We moved not much longer. I wanted neighbors and to be off the farm. I removed my phone number from my site and locked down all of my social media. I still sleep with the baby monitor in my son's room because I'm so scared of someone coming in at the middle of the night. His YouTube channel was shut down after a bit, and I haven't heard from him since, so Steven, I hope you wound up in jail, and let's not meet. Back when I was 16, I'm nearly 27 now, I briefly dated a guy named Tyler for what was maybe almost 5 months. We broke up when my mom's job moved us 3 states away. We were young, and I didn't want to maintain a long-distance relationship while I was trying to adjust to moving from what had been my home for 10 years and starting at a new school. We stayed casual friends until a mutual told me that he'd begun spreading gross rumors that he'd, quote, popped my cherry before I left, and after I called him to confront him, he had admitted to it. I told him I never wanted anything to do with him again and blocked him on Facebook and his number from my phone. I didn't even spare him a second thought until 3 years later. I just moved into my first apartment with my boyfriend of 2 years and 2 of our friends. I had a job I loved, a great relationship with our roommates, and it was an ideal arrangement for all of us. One night, I'd opened my Yahoo account for the first time in a little over a year from my desktop rather than my phone app, and immediately I had an instant message from Tyler. I'd forgotten that back when I used the desktop version frequently, my settings had me automatically log into the messenger, and I hadn't removed him from my contacts. But now, we were both nearly 21 and had done a lot of growing up, so I assumed Tyler was probably grown up too, and was initially comfortable catching up with him. He'd always been a bit awkward, but I was too, and the conversation was fairly pleasant, the usual, how have you been, and whatnot. With me doing most of the talking since in comparison, I had had more opportunities granted to me where I lived, now compared to my and Tyler's hometown, where he still lived. Eventually, we signed off since I had work the next morning, and while I wouldn't have considered us being friends again, I was happy it was civil, but then he started getting weird. Eventually I added him back on Facebook, and he would randomly send me messages about going through my pictures and liking how much I had, quote, grown up and what a woman I'd become. At first I brushed it off as awkward compliments, but then he started talking about the things he wanted to do to me, sexual things, and I firmly reminded him that I had a serious boyfriend and how inappropriate his comments were. He would apologize only to do it over again the next day. I got sick of it and blocked him again. I told him on Yahoo that if he didn't stop, I would be contacting the authorities. It was a bluff meant to hopefully scare him, and it worked for a few hours before he decided to send me a message detailing the violent sexual things he wanted to do. At this point, I was beyond annoyed and disgust, so I told him that if he ever contacted me again, I would send the screenshots of everything he'd said to me to his very Christian mother, who was graciously letting him live rent-free with her. I blocked him on my Yahoo account after that, and never heard from him again, assuming he was now out of my life. Oh, how I wish. Fast forward a few years, I'm 25, happily married, and my husband and I just returned to the States after living in Japan for a few years due to his military career. Shortly after we got settled into our new place, I took a trip to my hometown to spend time with my family and catch up with a few friends. Over coffee, a longtime mutual friend of mine and Tyler's, Amber, divulged to me that Tyler had been cyber-stalking me. Okay, I thought, but that's not really anything serious. I had nothing to hide from anyone. I was blissfully happy, but she started going into detail. I had moved 3 times to 2 different states, and then to Japan since I'd last spoken to Tyler, and was now living in a 3rd new state. And Amber said each time I moved, Tyler would suddenly talk about wanting to attend university in whatever city I'd moved to. When I moved to Japan, he claimed to be saving up to a vacation there, specifically the area we were stationed in, rather than a place like Tokyo or any of the other big touristy cities. It was weird, to be sure, and Amber had told me she knew Tyler was stalking my Facebook under a fake name. He openly admitted it to her, but he would never tell her the name he used. She was really concerned about his behavior and admitted she was only still in touch with him because of it. In truth, apparently he'd become infamous in our circle of mutual friends for being a creep and sexually harassing several women, successfully chasing all of them off. I felt uncomfortable with the knowledge. If her timeline of things was true, he had been keeping up with my movement for nearly 6 years, but what could I do? Neither of us knew what name he was using, and if all he was doing was following me and where I moved, I didn't think there was any harm to it, beyond just creeping me out since he was very unlikely to be able to afford to travel to wherever I was at the time anyway. I went home and eventually forgot what Amber had told me since there really wasn't anything I could do about it. I wasn't receiving any harassing emails or texts, so out of sight, out of mind. Months had passed and I went to work as usual. I was a hostess at an upscale local restaurant, and one night a coworker, a fellow hostess named Gina, said, "Oh, hey, you had a friend stop by here yesterday." Friend? I'd moved here nearly a year ago by now, but the only friends I had were my coworkers. When I asked who, assuming it was a regular that I was friendly with, I felt my heart stop when she replied, "Tyler." I asked if she was sure, and she vaguely described his appearance, assuring me that she'd told him I was off that day, and that she didn't know when I worked next. Hiding my panic, I claimed to not know anyone named Tyler, and that maybe he was looking for a previous employee. My first name was really common, and excused myself to the bathroom. Sure enough, there was a message from Amber when I opened my phone. She'd come home from work to see a Facebook post, which she screenshotted and sent to me, about a friend of hers and Tyler's visiting the city next to where I lived, which is a huge tourist attraction, and Tyler had gone with him. The restaurant I currently worked at only had maybe 7 locations scattered in various areas surrounding the tourism hub, each with a company name and an add-on depending on the specific location in town to make them easy to find. The coworkers I was friends with would tag me as, quote, checked in with them on Facebook when we would have drinks together after work, and it seemed Tyler had used them to find which one I worked at. Terrified, I spoke to my manager and told him everything that Amber had told me, and that Tyler had apparently showed up looking for me, and blessedly, he let me have the following day off. I still had to finish my shift. We had no one available who could cover for me to go home, but he gave me tasks that kept me away from working at the front door. And since it was a slow night, Gina let me go home first after I'd fill her in on the situation. I immediately called my husband when I clocked out, and he picked me up rather than let me walk home like I usually did. Thankfully, my husband had decided to switch military branches, and he would have to go to training for a few months, and we decided that it would be better for both of us if I had moved to his town to be near our family. I gave my job a 2-week notice the next day, much sooner than planned, but my manager already knew I was moving away and understood that I probably wanted to quit now rather than later. It's been 7 months since then. I'm happily living near my mother-in-law, literally on the opposite side of the country from my hometown and our last location, and had a close-knit little group of friends in our apartment complex. But I did a complete overhaul on my Facebook settings. No one can tag me in any location or picture without my manual approval, and my current location is unlisted to anyone not on my friends list. Amber still has Tyler on her Facebook, but she says they rarely speak anymore after he was recently served with a restraining order by a mutual friend of theirs. Seems I wasn't the only person he was stalking, and I'm not surprised given the stories of him that had been floating around our old circle of friends. I still get a little anxious, especially when I remember how close Tyler came to finding me, but I still don't understand why he's kept track of me for so long, and I don't think I ever want to know. On mobile. Sorry for any formatting issues. So a long time ago, I had a falling out with a friend who liked to cyber harass people she didn't like. Because I knew this, I took precautions on all my social medias and added the 2-step verification where it would send codes to your cell phone if someone tried to log in or change your password. Seems like a safe step, right? I never thought about it any further until a few days ago. I get an SMS text from a random number that addressed me by my full name, which freaked me out a little, because the spelling of my first name is pretty uncommon where I'm from. No big deal. Maybe it's just an old friend who changed phones. I gave the classic, "Who dis?" back at them, to which I received an even stranger text back, "Oh my goodness, it's you." "Are you 18? I have something I need to cash app you." Well, that's weird, I thought. Probably just some scam hack to get my cash app. I said again, "Who the fuck is this?" And I never received a text back from that number. No less than 5 minutes later, I get 3 calls and 2 spam voicemails from different unrecognized phone numbers. Then a text, "Pick up the phone," my full name. That's alarming. I immediately took screenshots. I had my boyfriend call from his phone, but no luck. I blocked the number and hoped that was it. Maybe 30 minutes later, I get 5 calls from a new number and a new, even more alarming set of texts. "I'm a 40-year-old man and I'm in love with you. I will keep trying to reach you until you respond. I won't stop." I immediately blocked the number and called my parents. Then within 2 minutes, he made a new number and texted me again. "Wow, I just want to talk to you for 5 minutes. I'll even pay you. But after that, consider me gone." Again, blocked. I alerted my boss. Then the text stopped. After work, I filed a police report and bought a baseball bat and set up some security alarms in my apartment. My first instinct was that it was a guy who I recently worked with who had been fired for sexually harassment. One of my friends / coworkers who is good with tech stuff changed his phone number and texted the number pretending to be me on a burner to get some more information out of him. It was a bit of a long conversation, so I'll sum it up by saying the guy basically wanted me to talk on the phone while he, well, you know. He called the fake me 26 times and got no answer, so we stopped trying. We went ahead and assumed that that was the end of it. The next morning, I get a text from a new number again. He was claiming to be one of my friend's fathers. I started to freak out. Both of my parents and my boyfriend were at work, so he sent his mom over to calm me down and stayed with me while I was alone in my apartment. I called my phone and she answered, and all he said in his super creepy raspy voice is, "Please," and then abruptly hung up. I was having a full-blown panic attack at this point, so she called the police department and had an officer come out to update my report. She was still texting the guy while the cop was there, and once she told him law enforcement had been contacted, his whole story changed. He said he doesn't know me or anything about me. He doesn't even live near me and means no physical harm. He's just a lonely guy who got my phone number from Facebook and decided to harass me. I remember this wrong, but I could have sworn I had my phone number set to private, but I know I still had it up there because of the 2-step verification. I recently posted something on Facebook Market, so I'm assuming that's where he found me. I've since deleted that account and changed my phone number, and nothing else has happened. Posting this here is more or less a warning to anyone who has that 2-step verification set up. Please double check right now and make sure you have the most private settings possible for everything. I'm not going to set up all that stuff with my new phone number. I'm not going to risk giving it out anywhere online. Creepy dude from the internet, let's never meet again, or I'll bust your fucking kneecaps in. The story's nowhere near as horrifying as some of the other ones I read here, but when I found this subreddit, I knew I wanted to share this experience here. So 3 years ago, I tried Tinder for the first time. I was 25 at the time, and, well, most 25-year-old women had dabbled on Tinder or the like. I haven't been single since I was like 17. I met my ex while I was in high school. 6 years later, we got married, had a baby. I was happy, but those last couple years together, he had really begun to resent me and the family we had created together. I fought to keep a relationship together, but the abuse came more frequent and more intense. It got to the point where I took our baby and fled the house in the middle of the night. My mind was scared, and my heart was raw. It was a really difficult time in my life. A couple of months after I left, I had a new home, a new job, and a renewed sense of life. I was starting to open up and could feel myself healing. I was, however, lonely. I was adjusting to shared custody and spent the weekends alone. I didn't want to jump into a relationship, but I did want to experience some of the things my 8-year relationship didn't allow me to do. Joining Tinder felt fun. It was new and scary, and after so much trauma, it felt nice to have so much positive attention. My self-worth was low, so the cheap compliments and instant gratification of the app felt incredible. Who am I to deserve their attention? Why would they choose to speak to me of all women? Not my healthiest coping mechanism, but I wanted to feel desirable. That's where I met Derek. Derek was an unassuming average guy. He was cute enough, but not so attractive that I felt self-conscious. Derek and I shared a few interests: craft beer, hiking, and he had a sense of humor that I liked. We agreed to meet up at a local restaurant. I was so nervous, my first day in 8 years. I donned my cutest dress, got made up, and headed out. As I waited in the restaurants, my palms were sweaty, my heart was fluttering, and I began to question myself. He arrived and everything was awkward at first. We ordered our first beers and started to break the ice. As soon as the buzz of the alcohol hit, our conversations took off. We had relaxed in each other's company, and the rest of the day went smoothly. We joked about karaoke across town. He laughed about how he didn't like karaoke. I'm a huge fan of karaoke. Well, no superstar. I've spent a good amount of time in choirs and can carry a tune well enough. One of my favorite rowdy weekend activities is going to that bar and busting out some songs with the sweet taste of gin on my tongue. I convinced him to go with me, and we left the restaurant. We sang into the night, taking shots, flirting, laughing. We ended the night in his truck, hearts racing with excitement. This had been what I needed. We texted back and forth more often, and soon we were talking about another date. I had enjoyed our time together, and liked that I didn't feel a deep connection with him. It was fun, and that was it. But my heart wasn't tangled up in feelings. He felt safe. We decided for a second date that we would go tubing down a river that runs through our town. We had parked his orange truck at the end of the tubing run, and took the tubes in my truck up the river. We agreed that he would zip my truck key with his into a pocket on his shorts, and he would drop me off at my truck afterwards. Bright summer heat warmed our skin, and the water felt crisp and fresh on our toes. The afternoon slipped past as we floated down the river. When we reached the bottom, we deflated our tubes and headed back to my truck. Only Derek reached into his pocket. His face sank. He looked at me and said, "Your key is gone." I laughed. Surely he was joking. He insisted that this wasn't a joke. Gravity pulled at my stomach, and I began to panic. This was the only copy of my truck key, and I had taken it on the river. I felt foolish, and worried about how I would get a new key if I can't find this one. The river was long, and we'd been tubing for hours. We'd stop at several places to swim. He offered to drive me home, and I accepted. During the drive, we made a plan to meet up the next day and search for my key at some of the stops we made. We spent the next afternoon combing our swimming holes for my key. Up and down we swam, with very little hope we would ever see my keys. We had to try though, and we kept at it. From one spot to another, we drove, we swam, and we went on. At the very last place, we checked. As the light of the afternoon faded into hazy orange, something caught my eye. Underwater, near the shore, were my keys. We were elated, and could not believe our luck. To celebrate, we went back to his place for some drinks. He drove me down a long wooded driveway, and at the very end was a shaded trailer. He told me that he was only renting a room here from an elderly couple, but they were on vacation so we could be alone. We walked over the creaking porch and entered the trailer. Inside, I could see the kitchen was messy. Not just a couple of dishes, but every surface was covered with mess. He ushered me away to show me his room. It was small, and not very clean either. Dirty clothes, mattress on the floor, and Rubbermaid Ben with some snacks like Doritos and cheap warm beer. We slept together, the yellowed light of the trailer accentuating the stains on the walls. Afterwards, the spark of fun I had felt when we first met had withered, and I felt gross. I decided it would be our last date. A week passed, and we had hardly texted. Our brief fling was ending, and I didn't expect to see him again. My mind moved on to other things. The coming weekend, my friends were coming to town, and I was excited. We made plans to go to the karaoke bar together on Saturday night. When the day arrived, I was surprised to see a text from Derek on my phone. "Are you going to karaoke tonight?" It read. I responded that I was, and he texted back that he would be there. "I thought you didn't like karaoke," I asked him, and he said that he had been invited by a girl he worked with, and thought he should give me a heads up that he would be with a date in case I was there. I thanked him for taking the time to let me know, reassured him that I wouldn't be bothered at all, and said I hope he had a great date. Around 9:30 that night, my friends and I arrived at the bar. The dim lights and reflective foil stars an all too familiar scene. We got our drinks and picked a booth with a good view of the stage. I had a strange sensation, like someone was watching me. I turned my head scanning the bar, and our eyes locked. Derek and his date were a few booths away, and he was watching us. He waved zealously with a big smile. His date turned around to look, and I managed an awkward wave. I was absolutely fine with him being on a date, but I didn't want to advertise that we knew each other or make the date uncomfortable. My friends were all aware of the time we had spent together, my thoughts on the experience, and the text he had sent me earlier. We were all thinking it was a bit odd that he would go out of his way to interact with me in front of his date, but no harm, no foul, he was just being friendly. The evening carried on, and we all had a great time, basking the atmosphere, drinking in the songs and laughter. A couple of hours in, we were sitting in our booth, and Derek stumbled over to our table with his date. He introduced her as Kate, and plopped down beside me, pulling her down into a booth with him. The strong smell of alcohol oozed off of them. I could see they were hammered. It became obvious they both had too much to drink. Their eyes glazed, and words stuttered. Kate seemed really nice, despite her state, and she launched into a drunk story to the whole table. My friends and I were fairly uncomfortable, and were unsure what was going on. Under the table, I felt Derek's sticky hand slide into my thigh. His date was right there, and I was stunned. Without making a scene, I removed his hand and excused myself to get another drink. As I walked across the room, I could feel his eyes raking my back, and sure enough, when I turned around he was watching. When I got back, Kate was slurring that her taxi had come. She and Derek exchanged a sloppy kiss and goodnights, and then it was just us and Derek. Derek's mood shifted after that. He was drunkenly aware of how uncomfortable the table was, and we could tell he was brooding about his date having left without him. Derek turned his attention to me. He slung his heavy arm onto my shoulder and leaned in, his sour breath managing to come together to form a clumsy sentence. "You're so cute. I love your laugh." I was rigid and just wanted him to leave. When he got up to get another beer, my friends and I spoke about the situation, one of them remarking, "You know he can do better than this, right?" I said yes. As casual as this has been, I had made a mistake. We came to the conclusion that it would be best if we ended the night early, as we didn't see him leaving me alone. As a backup plan, if anything went south, we agreed that the girls would, quote, go to the bathroom and leave out the back door, while our male friend would distract him and slip away. Derek arrived at the table, slurping down his beer very fast. He slurred, "Where are we going next?" I hesitated, but my friend told him that we would all be going home. Derek said he would walk us there, and we politely declined. He was leaning up against a wall and barely holding himself up at this point. We asked him how he was going to get home, and if we could call him a cab. Derek drunkenly pouted that he could just come to my place with me. Trying to shut him down as politely as I could, I told him that my child was there with a sitter, so I couldn't have him over. He didn't need to know that wasn't true. He refused a taxi and said he would just sleep in his truck, since his eyelids were dropping, and looking at the rest of his state, it seemed reasonable that he would be asleep in a truck, and we accepted that answer. As we started to leave, he stumbled after us. We stopped and reminded him that we were going to bed. He argued again that he should come with me. My friends and I locked eyes. It was time to engage our backup plan. The two girls and I excused ourselves to the washroom, while our friend distracted him. Slipping out the back door, the cool rush of night air hit us, and we hurried to the path that led to their hotel. Our friend caught up with us and said he had left Derek behind at the bar. We were all relieved to be out of there and started to walk back to the hotel. One of the girls was sober and offered to drive me home when we got to the hotel, and I accepted. A few minutes down the path, my phone began to ring. I looked at the caller ID and I felt my stomach drop. It was Derek. I turned the volume down and let it ring, and to my surprise, he left a voicemail. I turned on the speaker and played it out loud. Derek's voice sounded confused as his words melted together onto my phone. "Where are you guys? I thought we were gonna hang out. I don't understand." We were all glad that we had left, and agreed that this had been wild. That's when the phone rang again. Another voicemail popped up on my screen. In the dim light of the trail, I played the new voicemail aloud once more. His drunken speech was more intense this time, as he launched into how he didn't understand why I had left. I had hurt his feelings, and he was in love. The tone of his voice shook me when I heard him say, "I love you," but there was something dark and heavy about it that left me feeling unsettled. We were all creeped out, but happy to see the bright sign of the hotel ahead. We traveled the carpeted hallway to their room so my friend could grab her keys and take me home. As we entered the room, the phone began to ring again. This time, the voicemail sent shockwaves of fear into my body. Derek's voice had taken on an edge, and he repeated that he loved me, but he was actually really fucking mad at me for leaving him at the bar. He went on about how could I do this to him, and he didn't know what he was gonna do. His voice shook with anger as he stumbled over himself, expressing how I had betrayed him. The last thing he said before hanging up echoed in the hotel room. "You know I'm really starting to fucking hate you." This guy was unhinged and I was terrified. I was grateful the sight of Derek didn't show up when I was alone in his secluded trailer. My friends gave me a hug and told me to call them if I needed anything and to keep them updated. My friend took me home as I unlocked the door and stepped into the comfort of my home. I felt exhausted. It had not been the night out I expected, and Derek's erratic behavior had really freaked me out. Fresh out of an abusive relationship, his actions at the bar, then voicemails rang some all too familiar bells. That's when I saw the headlights. It was very late for anyone to be driving down my street. I peeked through the curtain. My blood ran cold and I trembled. Sitting in the cab of his orange truck was Derek. Mind racing, I panicked. This dude could barely hold himself up when we left. He was blackout obliterated. How did he drive across town to my house? How did he find me? I immediately remembered the other week when he dropped me off after my key was lost. How could I have been so stupid? I barely knew him. We only met 3 times. Derek's face was stony and etched with rage as he sat in the dark cab staring at my house. He wasn't getting out. He was just staring. While I was on my hands and knees peeking out of the window, all my lights were off inside. I was sure he couldn't see me. Then the screen on my phone lit up. He was calling me again. I quickly hid it so he didn't see the light. Hands shaking, I played the voicemail as quietly as I could. Derek only said one thing at a time, a phrase that sent terror shooting down my spine. In a drunken, sing-song voice, he almost taunted me quietly. "Where are you?" Click. I was terrified. Somehow, I hadn't really considered that I could be in danger, and chalked up all of the fear of my past experiences. Surely I was overreacting, and it was my fault for reading too much into this. I shouldn't be this scared, and I don't want to make a scene. That last voicemail sealed the deal. I figured even if I was overreacting, at the very least, he was a drunk driver. I called 911 and the dispatcher said someone would be there in a couple of minutes. As I peeked out the window, I saw him get out of his truck. He was done waiting. His heavy feet stumbled as they hit the pavement, and he looked around. Derek's voice cut through the night. He started yelling my name. The wild anger in his voice was tangible through the walls, and he just yelled into the street, "Where are you?" Derek started to stumble towards my house when the flashing red and blue lights cascaded down the street, lighting up his face and highlighting every ounce of rage carved into his features. 2 police cars pulled up, and the officers got out. I was still peeking out from the inside of my dark house and couldn't hear much of what was happening. I watched them breathalyze him, which he obviously failed. The officers inspected his truck. They spoke for a while, and one of the officers came to my door. I spoke to him about what had happened, and he was very empathetic. He said as unsettling as his actions had been, there was not much they could do without a direct threat. The officer let me know that they would be taking him in for the night, and he would be charged with drunk driving, but that he would be out tomorrow, and to make sure I kept my doors locked and stayed safe. The tow truck came to remove his orange truck from the road, and I could see him arguing. The officers weren't having any of it. They turned him around to cuff him. As the handcuffs locked around his wrist, he yelled out one last time, looking directly at the window I was peeking out. "I know you're in there." My name. "Why don't you come out and say goodbye?" As quickly as my street had filled up, it was emptied. The quiet shadows of the night swallowing the earlier chaos into nothingness. Derek had texted me the next afternoon. "I'm very sorry about last night. I was in a bad place. I responded that his actions were unacceptable, and how dare he show up to my house that my child lives at, and that I would prefer not to hear from him ever again. He apologized one last time, and I haven't heard from him since. Over the next few months, I would see him on his bike going to and from his workplace, so I knew he lost his license. I was always wary that we would bump into each other at some point, which thankfully never happened. I can only imagine how much angrier he was after he lost his license. I found out he had moved to the mainland a while back, which was quite a relief for me, and I no longer feel as on edge around town. So, Derek, let's never meet again. A few years ago, I was on Tinder where I matched with a police officer. I thought his dog was cute, and I figured this was an opportunity to finally pet a canine police dog. I was quickly disinterested after listening to him complain about his recent divorce. I don't recall details, but I remember it was very apparent he was the problematic person in the relationship. I was also very grossed out by how he fetishized me for my breasts, tattoos, and colorful hair. I was very upfront and told him I wasn't interested and that he was setting off some red flags for me. He begged me to give him a chance. I said no and blocked his number. A few days later, I get a knock on my door at around midnight. My heart dropped into my ass. It startled me so much I looked out the peephole and I see a stranger holding food. It's an Uber Eats delivery driver. I tell him through the door I didn't order food, but he said someone ordered it and he knew my name. I asked who ordered it and he said a name I didn't recognize. I tell him I don't want the food and give him directions to the dumpster to throw the food out because, at this point, I have no idea if he is actually from Uber. Later on, I'm going through my dating app matches and realize it was the cop's name. I go through my blocked messages and this guy had texted me a lot. The last text, "I hope you liked your dinner." I decided it's best to unblock this man so I can keep an eye on what he is saying in case I need to be worried about my safety, or if I'm gonna need to buy some bear mace to drop the cop. A few weeks later, I'm at work. I'm a hairstylist, and I get a call from a number I don't recognize. I answer and I assume it's a new client. The voice on the other end says, "Hey Rachel, I'm at Starbucks across the street. What's your drink order?" I ask, "Who is this? I don't have you in my appointment book," assuming it's a regular, and I made a scheduling order. He says his name, and again my heart drops into my ass. How does he know where I work? It's that cop. I ask him how does he know where I live and work, and he explains that he did a reverse image search on photos from my dating profile, found my social media, and Yelp page from my salon, then looked at my address from there. I tell him I'm calling his station reporting him for stalking, and if he ever comes near me, I will consider it a threat, and I will be ready to physically defend myself. After all that, he still begs me for another chance. I hang up, call the police station he works for, I'm in a very small town, and complain. They don't let me email screenshots of my creepy texts. I could tell nothing would be done. The lady literally said, "Oh, I'm sorry, he's going through a lot right now." They literally treat him like he's the victim. He's mostly left me alone after, but I was so scared living alone for the first time in my life. I have a semi-popular meme page on Instagram with about 8,000 followers. I sifted through and found like 5 of his accounts. I blocked them and moved on. This was several years ago, but all these memories came flooding back when I noticed a familiar profile photo on an account who commented on a post. I must have missed an account of his when blocking. I had posted a photo of me holding 2 big tunas I caught on a fishing trip, and he commented, "God, I wish I was one of those fish. I'd love to know what it's like to be held by you. Ew." First time poster here, so please be kind for any spelling errors and such. As a bit of backstory, I was working at a small chain motel in the Midwest as a night auditor, so my hours were normally 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. Those kind of hours, and being a woman, I'm bound to have some weird stories. The scariest time I've ever had while working there happened within my first month. So it was a little before my shift started, and because I was single and 22, I was on Tinder before work. I matched with this guy who seems cool, a little goth/alternative, and into Ouija boards, which is my type, so I was pretty hyped at the time. We talk for a bit, and I tell him I have to go to work. We say goodbye. Now, that night was my first night of training, so I was running the motel by myself for 9 hours. I was already a little nervous, but the vaguely familiar guy comes in to the front desk and asks for me by name. In my head, I've got red flags blaring at me because this dude is weird, not by looks, but just by vibe. I tell him that I'm me, and he explains that he's the guy from Tinder, and he saw that I was less than a mile away, so he went to see if I was possibly working at his hotel. That's right, this guy was staying where I worked. That was red flag number 2. I stay behind the comfort of my desk for 2 hours because the guy won't stop talking to me, mostly about his ex and how she left him and how he beat people up and how he wanted to bang me. Needless to say, I was uncomfortable, and this hadn't happened to me before in a work environment, so I did not know what to do. He finally decided to go to bed around 2 to 3 a.m., and I take a much needed smoke break. I go outside, and right after I spark up, guess who shows up? Creepy dude. I snoop a bit on his account, and he was a painter, and he was doing work locally, so he wasn't from here. He tells me where he's from and keeps getting closer and closer to me. He asks if he could smoke some weed, which I say yes, to get him away from me. I showed him where the cameras weren't at, and he pulled me in, smelled my neck, and started grabbing me. I swiftly hit him and told him he better not fucking touch me. I threw my cigarette on the ground and grabbed my phone and called my boss before going inside. Creepy dude rips the phone from my hand and proceeds to text himself. Now he had my number. The first thing he sends me is a grotesque picture of his, well, you know. It was disgusting, and it was like nothing I've seen before. Then came the creepy BDSM gifs, with captions like, "I can't wait to do this to you, you know what room I'm in." Now, I'm already freaking out, and I don't know why I didn't call the cops, and my boss wasn't answering. So, there's me in the back office having a panic attack, when I get more videos. Why I click it, I'll never know. I refuse to say what I saw in detail, but it was a snuff film, very violent, and very sexual. I then locked myself in the back room, cried, and waited a few hours before proceeding to make hotel breakfast. The text went on for a few days until I had enough and got the balls to tell my boss. He immediately kicked out creepy dude and banned him from our hotel. His company is not even allowed to book with that hotel anymore. In hindsight, I would have called the police, but I was just too scared. Creepy dude, let's never meet again. Firefighter/EMT here. Here's my top 3 horrifying experiences. 3. EMS call for an unknown EMS call for an unknown age female with some sort of problem. Husband is upset when we get there and simply says, "She's downstairs." We go in this basement of this amazing house on the water, and once downstairs we see nothing. Just then one of my crewmates goes, "Whoa!" The rest of us turn around and see this little Asian woman hanging from the basement rafters. Would have liked a heads up on that one by the husband. Scared the crap out of us. She was DOA and had likely hung herself a while before her poor son found her. Number 2. A few months ago, I was dispatched to an obvious death EMS call for a male found deceased by a friend. We get there and find this dude naked and bent over a couch with some sort of wearable garment that spreads his ass apart. There are, quote, toys all around. He's clearly dead. I don't even want to know what happened there. Turns out, he was a server at one of my favorite Mexican restaurants, and someone I knew of. Obviously, I can't say anything to anyone about the circumstances, as I know the restaurant owner as well. Super weird. Around Halloween about 10 years ago, we're dispatched to a self-inflicted gunshot wound, GSW, for an unknown age male with a GSW to the head. We get there after the police clear the scene and walk through the parking lot and a couple of the apartment complexes.
As soon as we approach, there are balconies with Halloween decorations on them. We see what appears to be a pretty cool full-size figure of a monster Frankenstein on one of the balconies. Lots of lights and pumpkins and stuff. Pretty cool looking. We go up to the apartment in question, and the police are like, "The dude is DOA." We're like, "Okay, well, confirm," and then we're out of here. Walk through the apartment, and then we see the victim. Guy goes on the balcony, sits down in a chair, and proceeds to blow his head off, putting a shotgun in his mouth. His head was obliterated from ear to eyeball. His skull, brains, and blood fell off the balcony ceiling and then splattered all over the parking lot. It was disgusting. Turns out that really amazing Halloween decoration we saw coming in was actually this dude. On the way down, we then really noticed all the pieces of skull, blood, and brains all over the cars and asphalt. It was unreal. We all returned to the quarters, the station, and about 2 hours later my engine company gets dispatched back to the scene for a quote washdown. The police would sometimes call us back to do a gross recon of a bloody scene by simply hosing the blood and debris away. We don't do that any longer, fortunately, though. I work at a pretty busy 911 EMS service. We were called to an apartment complex for a suicide threat. We were asked to stage for LEO, so we waited down the street. When we got on the scene, I was greeted at the door to the smell of shit, cigarettes, and weed. Inside, a 350-pound man with no legs was sitting on the floor butt-ass naked, covered in crap. He had taken quote pills, in quotes, because I still do not believe he did or wanted to say what they were. He had a note written on a greasy pizza box to call his family because he had killed himself. His plan was to place this piece of cardboard on the window and have a neighbor find it. After some arguing, the man agreed to go to the hospital by ambulance instead of LEO. This is when the man pulled out a folder. This folder had about 30 pages with names, numbers, and multiple suicide notes. We lifted the man up because he could not stand and moved him onto the stretcher. Then things got worse. The man decided to piss everywhere. I just so happened to be at the feet of the stretcher, so me and my coworker were covered. The officers and firemen jumped in for cover. I had the pleasure of riding the patient to the hospital, and I was cussed out the entire way there. At the hospital, I put on a pair of extra hospital scrubs and had to change my entire uniform, including socks, underwear, and boots at the station. My first night of clinicals was terrible. Our first call was to a guy who had accidentally stabbed himself while high. While my two mentors were stabilizing his wound, I began taking his medical history. I asked if he had a history of HIV or AIDS or any other STI, and he suddenly started yelling at me, calling me a nosy bitch. He then swung at me, and one of the guys I was with blocked the punch and took him down. It happened so quick it took me a while to process what took place. Thankfully the cops were already there and getting a report, and the wound was superficial, so the officers arrested him for drugs. Next call was to a death by overdose. I'll never forget how bloated the body was and how much foam was coming from their mouth. The last call we ran was a preterm birth. We rushed to get to the house, and when we got there, we found a barely 13-year-old girl screaming in pain. She was covered in blood and way too far along to transfer her to the hospital. After only 10 minutes, the baby was out, but with a amniotic sac still intact. Well, the two guys I was working under freaked out, so I had to be the one to break the sac open and pull the baby out. I tried to stimulate her and ended up attempting CPR on a stillborn while the mother was screaming, my baby, over my shoulder. I was the one who had to call the hospital to ask the medical director what to do. I had to continue the CPR until someone came who was qualified to declare her dead. It terrified me to the bone. I still have nightmares about this night. To preference this story, I'm a paramedic and I have been for about 10 years. Working in emergency medicine, you get to see the weirdest and worst of people, so it's not too uncommon to have these types of stories. However, in my 10 years, I have never experienced pure terror and carnage like I have about 6 years ago. I will not be revealing specific or identifying details, as it is to the privacy of the family, so this may be a bit long, but I hope it's worth the read. About 6 years ago, I moved to another city for work. I worked for a 911 ambulance service that responds to calls in the city, as well as the country, which had a few small towns. The city itself was not large, and sub 100k people. Working for that service required 24-hour shifts. It wasn't particularly busy, but you'd get 5 to 10 calls in 24 hours and generally get some decent sleep that night. The city was a pretty rough place as the oil industry had boomed there, which drew all sorts of folk from around the country to work in the oil fields nearby. One night in January, me and my partner, who's an EMT basic, received a call in the next town over. It was about 2 a.m. when the call came out, and the only information we had was that a person in an apartment called 911 after hearing the downstairs neighbor screaming for help. We respond immediately as the details were very limited. We arrive on the scene. Police and fire department were already there and were already getting ready to make an entrance into the building. Me and my partner were getting ready to go in with them. The person who called 911 was there and told us which apartment she heard the screaming from. We attempted to pound on the door at first to get the resident to come to the door. When no one answered, the fire department got ready to kick down the door and make an entry. Luckily, the landlord showed up and gave us the keys to get into the unit. As we opened the door, the creepiness started. The apartment was pitch black, not a single light on, as if no one was home. The police entered first, and with our flashlights, we followed. Looking around the apartment, the kitchen and dining room looked like a hoarder's nest. I'm not exaggerating when I say there's literally 5-foot-tall mountains of garbage, food, and dishes on the table, and the same in the living room, but with magazines, clothes, and garbage. This meant there was only a very narrow walkway to navigate the apartment. Officers proceeded down the hallway ahead where the bedroom and bathroom was. One of the officers stopped at the bathroom door as there were a light shining from underneath. The officer opened the door, and as he stood in the hallway with a flat tone, he said, "She's in here." I walk in first into the bathroom. The first thing I notice is the peculiarity of the light from the bathroom. It is a very pale yellow light coming from a single bulb on the ceiling, similar to those in old heat lamps that used to be common in bathrooms. The light gave off an odd vibe as it was just so unnatural. The next thing I notice is the lack of anything in the bathroom. No floor mats, no toilet cover, no bowls, no knickknacks, just nothing. Empty, except the vanity, which contained the sink. On top, in the bowl of the sink, were approximately 20 to 30 makeup bottles piled over. Some were open and leaking, causing there to be powders and liquids everywhere. The last thing I noticed was the body of an elderly woman lying naked in the tub. As I walk closer, I can see her lying on her side, nearly in a fetal position. Her skin is so pale, and there's about 8 inches of water in the tub. Looking at her face, her eyes are closed, and her head is against the bottom of the tub, with her mouth and nose completely submerged underwater. My partner steps in behind me. He suggests we call the coroner and inform them of the body. 2 officials pile into the bathroom behind my partner, so there's 4 of us in this tiny bathroom, with me next to the lady in the tub. With me being who I am, I decide to do my diligence and at least make sure the lady is dead. I kneel down next to the tub and reach my arm and put my fingers on her neck and attempted to check for a pulse. In an instant, without warning or the slightest hint of movement, the woman springs up out of the tub with the speed of a cat in water. The only reaction I was able to manage was just to stand up as quick as possible, and I just stood there staring at her. She stared back at me, eyes as wide as they could be. She then started screaming at me. She attempted to cover herself with her hands as best as she could while sitting in the water still. I quickly look around and notice everyone else who was in the bathroom with me bolted out of there, not a single soul in sight. I try to steel myself and try calming the lady down, telling her who I am and why I was there. She denied screaming and told me she does this every morning as she has some kind of joint condition and soaking in warm water helps ease her joint pain. Now at this point, I have my doubts and I have to question the woman's sanity. I question her regarding self-harm and address what potentially could be interpreted as suicidal behavior. She denies all of it. The next step is to determine her mental capacity to ensure she is in the right frame of mind to make reasonable and appropriate decisions. She answers all my other questions appropriately, and at this point, per the law, she is able to refuse any and all care as she is mentally sound. I ask her if she will at least allow me to check her vitals so that I can be sure that she is healthy and I can add it to my report. She angrily refuses and tells me to get out of her house, which she has the right to. I acknowledge and leave her a sign of refusal of service form. As I leave the bathroom, my partner and the 2 officers that were in the bathroom with me, along with 2 other officers and firefighters that were waiting in the apartment, are just staring at me with eyes wide and gaping mouths, speechless. I don't say a word and we all leave the apartment. Once we all go outside, I had the most uneasy, uncontrolled fit of laughter. My partner and the officers started laughing too. I thought I might have shit myself. My partner told me later that all he remembers is seeing her move, hearing me say, "Oh shit," which I don't even remember, and running out of the bathroom. I wish I could say I never saw a lady again, but that would be untrue. If you all enjoyed this and want to hear part 2, let me know. Part 2. This one should be a bit shorter since you already have the backstory. Like I said after this call, I was able to laugh about it once my heart stopped racing. I figured I would have never have seen the lady again, and that gave me comfort. I told the story several times to family and friends and coworkers, just because of the sheer shock value. This part of the story I've only told a couple people, because most probably can't stomach it. So, be warned, about 3 months after the first call with the bathtub lady, I'm working with another EMT basic partner, not the same one as before, but he is well aware of the story. So, the day's going by like normal and nightfall comes. I'm hoping to get some sleep as generally the night is a little calmer. Each of our stations have a few bedrooms, with twin beds to allow us to sleep somewhat comfortably. I take off my boots and lie down and doze. I always keep my radio turned way up and right by my head so I can wake up if we get a call. Sure enough, tones drop on the radio and I wake up. Looking at the clock, it's around 4 a.m. Radio traffic requests the ambulance for a welfare check on an individual who has not been seen for a while. Me and my partner get up, put our boots on, and start responding to the address. As we get closer, I start recognizing the area. Before I even see the building, I tell my partner, "I swear to God if it's the same goddamn lady." He just laughs and we continue. As we pull up on the scene, sure as shit, same freaking building. At this point, my heart starts to race again. A few officers are already on the scene. As I get out of the ambulance, one of the officers comes up to me and tells me, "The lady we are here for has a friend that works at the gas station nearby. The friend told 911 that the lady usually comes and visits him every day, but that the friend hasn't seen her in a few weeks." The officer tells me there is an odor coming from the apartment complex too. If you work in EMS, or have been around such, you know what that means. If not, then I won't spoil it just yet. I asked the officer if she is familiar with the person or has heard the story of the last encounter. The officer tells me she has not, but her 2 coworkers behind her were on the original call with me and are smiling, but not saying a word. I tell the officer who the person is and our last run-in with her. The officer raises her eyebrow a bit and says, "Okay." As we approach the apartment complex yet again, as I open the main door, you can immediately smell the quote odor permeating throughout the entire complex. We walk downstairs to the door of the lady's apartment. I bang on the door a few times and shout, "Ambulance!" No response. Officers bang on the door. No response. We try to get a hold of the landlord again to give us access, but he is unavailable. Over the radio, I request the fire department, and we request them to bring a door spreader. The fire department arrives, and they come downstairs and set up the door spreader. If you don't know what a door spreader is, it's the tool that fire departments place between the 2 door jambs and use a lever to start pressing the door jambs apart, freeing the latch from the door frame so we can get in. As I finally get the door open, that awful smell spills out of the apartment. Same thing as last time. Pitch black in the apartment, piles of garbage all around the apartment 5 feet high that barely allows you to move around. Though this time, it's a bit different. There are thousands of flies buzzing around. Again, the officers enter first, with us following with our flashlights. One of the male officers gets down the hallway to the bathroom, opens the door. He looks back at me, shakes his head, and continues forward. My EMT partner, who is pretty new, is right behind me. I turn to him and tell him to wait in the hallway, and that I'll let him know if I need him. I was trying to be nice and spare him. The officer continues down the hallway toward the bedroom. At this point, the anxiety is increasing. because now we are in uncharted territory, and once again, I have no idea what we are gonna find. The officer eventually makes it to the bedroom. I see him shine his light into the bedroom, then uses the bend of his elbow to cover up his mouth and nose. He waves me over. As I walk to him, the smell only gets stronger. I peer in the bathroom with my flashlight, and that's when I see her. The bedroom is set up so the bed is right in the middle of the room, with the head pressed against the wall. The floors are littered with clothes, magazines, books, food, and garbage. At the foot of the bed, there are 2 large 4-foot tall piles of random shit. At the base are probably 4 feet in diameter. Yeah, I know it's hard to visualize. In the tiny space between the 2 huge mounds, and the foot of the bed lies the bathtub lady. Now, this lady is a very small old lady. When I saw her for the first time, she may have weighed 90 pounds. She is also a white lady. Stunned for a moment, I stand there next to the officer and just look. This is the part that gets grotesque. Bathtub lady is laying perfectly on her back, with her arms folded up, crossed in front of her, like you would see a skeleton doing in the movies. Bathtub lady's skin looks almost like paper. It is dried out and shrunken, turning black and rotting. The level of decomposition from her is one I haven't seen before. Her hip bones were visible where her skin had cracked. Her kneecaps were coming through her skin. A few ribs were just barely visible poking through the skin on the sides of her upper abdomen. Her hair was beginning to fall out. Her lips were gone. Her eyes were gone. I got a bit closer to look. All I kept thinking was, if you wake up, this officer's probably gonna draw and shoot you in the head. I walked a little closer to look. She was almost perfectly preserved like a mummy. There was nothing left of her eyes. The sockets were completely empty with the exception of maggots crawling through the sockets. From behind me, I hear a couple quiet, muffled gags. I walk back out to my partner. I tell him, sorry man, but we need the body bad and you need help. Everyone walks outside to get some fresh air. The officer that was in the bathroom with me gagged a few more times outside, but luckily didn't vomit. The one good thing about this is we had recently been given these really nice PAPR receptors for a recent Ebola outbreak. My partner grabbed the body bag and I grabbed the PAPRs. We put our gear on and walked back inside. The officer that was with me, like a fucking champ, came back inside as well without a receptor and held the flashlight for us. Me and my partner had spent 10 minutes just clearing out the trash, so we had enough room to put the body back down next to the bathtub lady. Once we got enough room, the sketchy part came. If you ever seen a body with the amount of decomposition, it was brittle. We attempted to move her over as carefully as we could, as not to break anything. However, when we attempted to move her, she was stuck. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was at the head. My partner was at the feet, trying to move her over. I put my arms down her back and neck to support the head so it wouldn't break off. I got down to look as I lifted to see what we were getting stuck on. As I lifted, I saw it was already too late. As I lifted, the skin on her back was stuck to the carpet, so I lifted and started peeling off her ribs and spine. We had no other choice as we were unable to cut the carpet at this time. As we lifted her up, all of the skin came off her back and stayed stuck on the floor, almost like some sick chalk outline, which is when I saw it. It seemed to be like 1,000 maggots crawling around on the inside of her skin, between the skin and her back. We moved her gently into the bag, luckily not breaking anything. We got the bag out into the ambulance, where we would then transport her to a funeral home with our windows rolled down and sirens blasting, so we wouldn't have to stay in the ambulance as long as possible. So that's my story of the bathtub lady. Sorry for all the gross details. What we figured is she died shortly after our first encounter with her, and that we may have been the last ones to see her alive. Recently, I've become a qualified paramedic. I've seen many creepy things whilst working, but one story in particular sticks in my head. The story's back when I was a student. One night, I was working on a car with my mentor. We got to a 84-year-old patient who lived in a creepy cottage in the middle of nowhere. When we walked into the cottage, we heard shouting upstairs. The cottage was filled with cobwebs, dirt, and was icy cold. We went up and saw that she sat up on her bed with her eyes wide open. We obviously asked a lot of questions. Why we called, etc. She told us she could see dead children climbing up the side of her cottage on ladders. She then said she would not lay down back in her bed because there was hundreds of spiders crawling all over it. My mentor and I were extremely creeped out at this point, but the next thing that happened will still be with me for the rest of my life. The woman started waving behind us. We both looked and there was no one behind us. The woman started shouting and screaming, and when we could finally calm her down, she said a little girl with a rope around her neck was hanging there. This job will forever stick with me. I would like to hope it's just a water infection causing the confusion, but who knows. I've been on Reddit for a few weeks now, and I only signed up a few minutes ago. I discovered this sub along with others, and I started flashbacking to my own experiences. I feel like this is pretty tame compared to the others, but it somehow belongs here. This took place many years ago. It was 1998, and the internet was relatively new. I remember this because I used Netscape as my browser, and my two IMDIs were from Yahoo and AIM. Then there were search engines like Lycos, Savvy Search, and all those other 1998 stuff young whippersnappers probably don't remember. I was a bored preteen, stuck at home for the summer with nothing to do. Luckily, the internet was a good distraction. I usually bummed around surfing stuff related to Extreme Ghostbusters / Real Ghostbusters, which was my fandom at the time. But earlier in the year, my sister installed a program called MIRC on the PC. I didn't know what it was, but she told me it was just a place where I could chat with other people. I was a quiet kid. I didn't have lots of friends in real life, but I was a big hit online. I was more open and more cheerful when I was talking to someone behind a computer screen. I met a lot of people from this chat room called the Looney Bin. It wasn't an adult chat room or anything. It was just a place where people could come in, meet others, and be totally random. Since I was afraid of being left out because of my age, I lied and said I was 16. The people I met there were welcoming. This is important. At the time, Star Wars Episode 1 was a huge thing, and so was Natalie Portman, because Queen Amidala. I somewhat idolized her character, so I put the word Padme in my username. I think it was Padme, and then a string of numbers or something. I also thought it was a beautiful name. So every day I would wait for everybody to leave home because my mom would freak out if she saw me chatting online. Back then, she assumed everyone I talked to was a pedophile or something. Log into MIRC and go to the Looney Bin and just have some fun until dinner time. One day, I was talking about Star Wars Episode 1 with someone in the chat room. Suddenly, another chat room opens up. You can talk to someone privately, and this is where I met Anakin Wannabe, AW for short. He seemed like a nice guy. He was from the US and at the time was 21 years old. I told him my usual spiel, 16, female, Philippines. He was delighted to meet a young girl who was interested in the Star Wars fandom. Of course, I told him I wasn't as into it as others, and that I only started because of episode 1. It didn't matter to him though. AW mostly talked on and on about the fandom, and I would just comment and listen to him the whole time. And then he tells me, actually, one of the reasons I talked to you was because of your ID, Padme something. You must be pretty, like Padme. He didn't say like Natalie Portman. He said, like Padme. I just again laughed to myself and told him I was far from being pretty like Natalie Portman. Again, he insists I'm just gonna be humble and starts to talk about how he's gonna, quote, find a girl like Padme and marry her, adding it with, maybe that girl's you, and a bunch of winking faces. I didn't think much about it then. When you're 12, you don't really know these things. Either that, or I was just stupid. I didn't get any red flags because I just dropped the subject. We talked about other stuff, but he would almost always bring up something related to Padme, like, wow, you're smart, just like Padme, or something like that. I thought it was weird, but again, I ignored. We talked a few more times, and then AW started to get creepy. Not really creepy, maybe overly cringy is the term. It was summer, like I had said, and my family and I often visit my aunts and cousins. We would stay there for a few days, and I wouldn't have time to go online, or even just for a few hours. I'd be doing something else, and I'd log on a bit later in the day just to have a quick look of what I missed. But he'd always be there going, where were you? Or, don't you know how much I missed you? Or, I waited here for so long, I missed you. It made me feel guilty at the time, and I'd always apologize. He made me promise to see him earlier the next day, and I did whenever I could. A few weeks later, I log in as I always do, and then all of a sudden, AW invites me to this chat room. I'd forgotten the name he had given me, but it had the name Padme in it, of course. He said this chat room was just for the two of us, more specifically for me, quote, the most beautiful girl in the world. Then, he goes on to tell me how we would meet and send pictures to each other because he really wanted to start a relationship with me. I don't know what happened, but maybe it's because I felt guilty for lying to him. I fessed up. I told him I was really sorry. I wasn't 16 years old, I was 12, and I was nothing like Padme. I told him it's better if he forgotten about me, and that I understand if he never wanted to talk to me again. He didn't reply for a long time, so I assumed he was really mad and about to exit the chat room when he replies. He tells me that my age doesn't matter, whether I'm 16 or 12, and he actually didn't mind that I was 12, that he still loved me, and that he would love me forever. He kept saying stuff like, I want to make this work for you, Padme. I love you. I'm going to make you the happiest wife ever. I think it was then I realized that there was something wrong with this guy. My name's not Padme, AW, it's Jane. It doesn't matter, you're my Padme forever, he replied. That was weird. Well, Reddit, I wish I could have told you that I helped. I wish I could have told you that I told him he had issues and he needed to resolve, and that he could find someone to help him. I wish I could have told you that it ended well, and that he promised he'd get better. I wish I could say we parted on good terms, but I can't. I was 12 and scared. I logged out and didn't come back on MIRC for the rest of the day or the rest of the week. Just in time too. Our computer was ransacked by a computer virus which came from MIRC channels. We had to get it reformatted and my sister never downloaded it again. Seeing what it did to the PC, I never tried to download it either. I felt too guilty. I felt really horrible, and I could only imagine how painful it was for AW. I blamed myself for a while, and felt like his issues were caused by me lying about my age. There were times that I'd just stop and think about AW. I would wonder if he got the help he needed, and I honestly hope he did. When I was in the end of middle school and the beginning of high school, I was on home instruction due to health reasons. It's different than homeschooling because they would send teachers from the school and you would have 1 2 to 3 hour class a day, usually at the local library or at your house. Because I wasn't in proper school, I was pretty lonely and spent my time trying to make friends and socialize online. One of the websites I met a lot of people on was Quizilla. I would make a lot of quizzes. Some of them got popular and read awful fan fiction stories on there that, as a young teenager, I found pretty addicting. I talked to other people who wrote stories and made quizzes. This is how I met Chloe. Chloe was around my age, if not a year or so older, and eventually we left the Quizilla PM system and tried messaging on AIM. She always used her father's AIM account, saying she had overprotective parents. She lived in New Jersey, and I was only one state away in New York. After talking to Chloe for a bit, one day, she said she wants to introduce me to a friend of hers. They knew each other in real life, and she thought we'd get along since we liked the same stuff. She was slightly older, 16, and named Matt. Matt and I instantly became friends. We talked for hours and hours every day and stayed up until very late at night talking to each other. If I wasn't in class, I was pretty much always talking to him. I still talked to Chloe at first, but eventually we drifted apart. But Matt and I were growing a lot closer. For my birthday, he wanted to give me a gift, so I gave him my P.O. box. My parents didn't know I was talking to people online at the time, and I wanted to keep it that way, so I wouldn't lose a lot of my friends. Technically, it was my dad's P.O. box, but he is less snoopy, and I made some kind of excuse about it being a friend who moved. I knew I couldn't have anything come to my house, because my mom would be very suspicious and wouldn't believe that. One day, after many months of talking, Matt told me he liked me. I didn't return his feelings but said I hope we could still just be friends. He was upset but took the rejection well, or so I thought, and our friendship continued. He'd mention it from time to time that he still had feelings for me, and it made me a bit uncomfortable, but I valued him a lot as a friend and didn't know many people I could talk to all day like that, so I brushed it off. Matt started talking about his other friends in his town in New Jersey a lot. Eventually, He said he wanted to introduce me to his friend Josie. He had spoken a lot about Josie. Josie was around the same age as him and was recovering from drug problems, having been in rehab. He knew what it was like to lose a lot of friends and get pulled out from school, etc. He introduced us, which also happened on AIM because this was before the days of social media. Josie and I got along great, but I suspected it was really Matt. Just little things here and there, like them being on at the same time a lot, some typing quirks and writing style. The difference in typing they had seemed a bit fabricated, but he seemed like a three-dimensional person at least. I didn't say anything because I thought it was interesting Matt would pull that. I was really into psychology and stuff like that, and I wanted to see where he would go with it, if it really was the same person. At that point, I wasn't 100% sure, and felt it could go either way. Needless to say, after talking to Josie, he confessed feelings to me. Again, I wasn't interested. He was okay with that. Eventually, Matt and Josie started introducing me to more and more friends. It became blatantly obvious they were all the same person. Josie was the only one who felt fleshed out. These people got increasingly two-dimensional and had very similar odd interests and the same typing style. I was sure it was all Matt. Still, I played along as if I believed it. Most of these guys would eventually try asking me on a date. Some were girls who acted as, quote, rival characters. This continued on for a little bit. He essentially created a whole fake group of friends in his town. Eventually, there was a night where nobody was online. Another thing that tipped me off to the fact that these were all the same person at the beginning was that they were on versus off at similar times. Later on, I ended up finding this IRC chat room. I really loved it. I met a few cool real people. I started going on that chat more often and made friends there. This chat consumed most of my time. I would also have AIM open to talk to Matt there, but my responses were growing slower. I was much more interested in the real people in the chat than the fake ones Matt created. I told Matt I was slow to respond because my computer was lagging. Some nights, I didn't sign on AIM at all because I was talking to people in the chat instead. Matt didn't like this. When we did talk, it was increasingly filled with tension, where I said my computer was lagging. He said, it's lagging because of that damn chat. He would snap at me about talking to other people in the chat and becoming closer with them whenever we did talk. I was getting fed up, especially since I really liked my new chat friends. One day, I signed in on AIM and got an angry message from him, deciding it was the last straw. I wanted him to go away. I told him I didn't want to be friends anymore. He tried to protest, so I told him everything, that I knew all the people were fake, and I was just playing along with it. I just wanted to end things once and for all. He was very angry. He denied that the people were fake, but instead questioned me. Were the things I said about myself in real life a lie too? He got scary at the end, telling me how much I'd regret this, but nothing happened for a while, and I disappeared. There was some forum I used to go on a lot at this time, and eventually a new user joined. This was common because it was pretty active, but this user had a quote from a movie I loved dealing with betrayal as its signature. Matt and I used to talk about this film a lot. This user kept trying to be friendly with me and message me. In the private message system, I told him that I knew it was Matt, and then he got angry. He threatened to kill me, and in a detailed, brutal manner. I still to this day have no idea how he found me on this forum. I never told him about it, didn't post personal information, and my username was different from anything he knew. I had gotten a new email after this because I didn't want to be contacted by him in any way. He started emailing me, sending me pictures of places near my house, including my house. He did not know my address and only a P.O. box as a few towns away, and places I went to a lot and never told him about. The emails were creepy. I don't even know how he found out all this information or even my new email. I didn't tell my parents because I didn't want to be banned from talking to people online, which, looking back on, was really stupid. I was scared. I had a cell phone at this point, and I never gave him the number, but he started calling me on it and leaving messages saying the same kind of things, how I should just take him back in my life because then he wouldn't have to do all this to me, how he'd change my mind eventually, and if I did anything to make him angry, like grow close to other people, he would send more threats. Like with all the other stuff, I still have no idea how he got my phone number. I had a friend online who was a 4chan type wannabe hacker. After months of this, I asked him for advice, and he said he would scare him away. I have no idea what he did, and he wouldn't tell me, and be coy to avoid the question, but things de-escalated a lot after this. Matt had disappeared. I thought it would be the end, but every couple months, even up to when I was in college, I'd meet someone through some site I was going on and know right away that it was him. He always had the same sounding name and way of talking. When he knew that I was always on to him, instead he tried to become friends with my friends. I guess to find out information about me, I had to warn friends for years later, both online and offline friends about him just in case. At this point, I wondered if Chloe and Matt were the same person. One day though, it stopped. I figured he grew bored. It had lasted for many years by that point though, so I was shocked. But I didn't complain. I always thought he would come back, but he never did. I ended up looking him and Chloe up on Facebook when this all felt distant to me, just to see if anything would come up. I found him. He was engaged to another girl. They had pictures on the beach where they wrote their names in a heart in sand. I wondered if she even knew half of the stuff he had done to me. I also looked up Chloe, and to my surprise, she was a real person and now had a baby. I don't know if the person I was talking to is actually Chloe though, or a fictional version created by Matt, or even vice versa. You know how when you talk about someone with a common name, you give them nicknames to sound different from other people with the same name? Like Pokemon Matt, Firefire Matt, etc. To this day, I call him Josie Matt. So I've kind of been wanting to post this for a while now, but a combination of technical difficulties and fear have been preventing me from doing so thus far. Now though, it's the middle of the night and I've got nothing better to do, so I'm gonna get this off my chest. I grew up with parents who were reasonable, loving people, but who were also more than a little paranoid when it comes to the internet. Anything that allowed anonymous communication in any form was banned, point blank, from the household. Even Club Penguin wasn't allowed because you could chat in it. Naturally, when I got my first laptop at 12, it was a piece of crap, gotten only because of all of the homework that year was online. The first thing I did was start talking to people on the internet. I wasn't going on chat rooms or anything because my parents' warnings still resonated with me, but I wasn't avoiding contact either. I ended up making a DeviantArt account. I know, cringe. I didn't do too much posting as lack of artistic talent. In spite of this, however, I was contacted via private message by a guy who I'll call Joker because his profile picture was the Joker. That should have been a warning sign in and of itself, honestly. Joker just started talking to me out of the blue. I think I'd commented on one of his pieces or something, and he reached out to me to thank me for my kind words. We started talking. It turned out we had a lot of common interest. We played the same games, liked the same cartoons, etc. He seemed really nice. I think it was maybe a week or two in that the first uncomfortable thing happened, even if I didn't think much of it at the time. The two of us shared a somewhat dark view of the world, so there were a lot of dark jokes passed back and forth between us. Sometime about a week after we started messaging, he casually mentions thinking that the world would be better off without him. I sent him a sad face and assure him that it wouldn't, as I quite liked talking to him. He didn't say anything more about it then, so I assumed that was it. It wasn't. Joker talked about suicide a lot. His talking about it quickly morphed from passing commentary to long graphic rants about how much he hated himself and wanted to die, and what method would be best for him to do so. I spent hours talking him down over chat, terrified that one day I wouldn't be able to do enough and he'd actually do it. His messages started to get creepy in a different way. He started telling me how grateful he was to have me, how no one had ever cared about him as much as I did, how important I was to him, how he couldn't live without me, how he'd just die if ever he were to lose me. He was obsessed. Well, one day, a couple months in, my laptop breaks. It wasn't too bad, but it still took a couple of days before everything was back in working order. I logged back into DeviantArt to find dozens of messages, all from Joker. They started off normal enough, but quickly became frantic after I didn't respond. The last message he had sent me was along the lines of, "I can't take this anymore," followed by a link to a picture image. The image was a pair of slit wrists. The cuts were deep and fairly fresh looking too, with red inflamed edges, and the beginnings of an ugly scabbing just beginning to settle over the top. I was horrified. I quickly messaged him back, terrified I just lost a friend, and he responded. "I thought I lost you," he said. "I thought you'd left me. I couldn't handle the pain without you. Don't ever do that to me again." I said I wanted, and he seemed relieved. He only got worse from then on. It reached a point where practically our every conversation consisted of him either professing his obsession with me or threatening suicide, or even both. The stress was keeping me up at night. I was terrified that one day I'd open up a chat to see nothing. I was utterly convinced that it was my job to keep this man alive, and that I was failing miserably at it. Joker kept escalating. One day, nearly a year in, he finally said something that frightened me so badly I had to leave. Joker started talking about how I was, quote, the last good person left on this miserable planet, and stuff like that. He waxed poetic about how much he wanted to kill himself, and said he'd finally find a way to be truly happy. He said the only way he'd ever find happiness was in killing himself, and taking me with him. That way, we could always be together, free from the cruel weight of the world. He started going into very detailed, very graphic descriptions of how he'd kill me. A lot of them involved carving out my heart, then clutching it to his chest, and laying beside me as he took his own life too. I was terrified enough, so I did what I should have done a long time ago and deleted that account. For years following that incident, I never spoke to anyone online again. Even to this day actually, there's still a lingering sense of dread when it comes to an online interaction. So, to the boy who I thought was my first internet friend, I don't know what your deal was, whether you were mentally ill or purposely manipulating me, or a combination of the two. Let's never meet again. I've debated posting this story, as this will be my second post, and although many people liked my first story, I got many criticisms along the lines of being stupid and careless, etc. And coincidentally, this event occurred on the same holiday the first incident happened, a few days prior. So I was on holiday with my boyfriend and his family. We hung out with his stepsister a lot, due to her being a similar age, with a similar interest in alcohol. Oh, the beauty of all the inclusive holidays. This one night, we have drinks, and we leave the hotel to hang around the beach directly opposite. With food stalls and music, the atmosphere was busy and friendly, and we take notice of a large group of fellow teenagers. They are all talking and laughing, so we decide to go over and join in. The group mainly consists of Italians, and they were excited by our English accents and happily involved us with their conversations. We mainly talked to these three guys because their English was the best. I'm a somewhat shy person, not so much anymore, but back then I was 17 and particularly shy at this point in my life. I haven't joined in with too much of the conversation. I was feeling uncomfortable, not because of anything weird, just because I felt anxious socially. After a while of chatting with these people and laughing, one of the guys who looked to be around 21 or 22 claimed they were all heading to a party. Some people in the group cheered at the prospect of a party, and shortly after a car drove over to pick them up, the majority of the people either jumped in the car, driving off cheering, or simply walked in the same direction as the car. We were left with the 21 to 22-year-old guy, heavy built and tall. He told us he was going to lead us to the party, as they'd been asking us to join them, and we obliged. I wasn't too keen on going, but my boyfriend and stepsister were, and as I knew there were going to be lots of people there, I thought there would be no harm attending a party with fellow teens. This guy starts leading us down streets, telling us now he has lived here for 2 years, and how he loves it. Note that we were not walking in the same direction as the car and the other people, but I put it down that as maybe he was taking us through a shortcut. After about 10 to 15 minutes of walking, the guy starts getting a bit confused and was looking around as if he didn't know which direction to take next. I found this odd, seeing as he claimed to live here for 2 years. He leads us around for another 10 odd minutes, looking dumbfounded and more confused by the minute, but finally, he says, "Down this street," and we arrive outside an apartment building. It was about 3 stories high with a rusty old gate. We were led through and into an elevator. "The party's just up here in my apartment, 2nd floor," the guy says, pressing the number 2 button on the elevator. The door shut tight, and we began moving upwards. This was when my senses kicked in hard. Something felt very off to me, and had done since he had been confused with his directions. The lift was rickety and old, and was groaning as it softly trembled upwards. I think this was the point my boyfriend and stepsister finally realized something wasn't quite right, and believed my complaints I had made whilst walking to the apartment. After a painfully slow and shaky minute in the elevator that had felt like many more minutes, we came to a stop and the doors opened to face another door, wooden and locked. The guy gets out with his key, and the door opens. It swings open to reveal a hallway with about 5 doors, 2 on each side, 1 at the end. This pinpoints the minute I realized one simple thing: we need to get the fuck out of here. There was no noise of a quote party, no music, no talking, no laughing. It was silent, completely silent. I started tugging on my boyfriend's arm, knowing he'll realize that I'm beginning to feel scared. He takes my hand and gives me a reassuring squeeze, and a look that says, "Don't worry," and I tried not to. The guy at this point had gone pretty quiet compared to his non-stop chatting on the journey, mumbling incoherent words, some English, some Italian. He leads us to the door at the end of the hallway, and it opened out into a large balcony that mimicked a garden. The floor astroturf, and lawn chairs dotted around. There was a table with speakers, alcohol, and cigarettes covering it. To be quite frank, it was a shithole. But we were too occupied and shocked with the fact that we had been promised a party, and all we could see was ourselves, this weird balcony, and this even weirder older guy. He spoke with us for a moment, and my boyfriend asked him sternly where everyone else was. The guy mumbled something about them turning up soon, and said he was going to get some of his friends from another room to introduce us. When he said this, he smiled in a way that made me feel so unbelievably desperate to escape. That smile, to me, spoke volumes that this quote party would not be fun for us. He left the balcony door open, and I watched him walk to the other door on the left of the exit. He knocked and spoke in what I assumed to be Italian, and I heard several male voices respond, also in this language. The 3 of us turned to face each other. "We need to get the fuck out of here," I said, whispering. I know, don't worry, we will," my boyfriend said. And he began talking quietly about a plan. The plan was to simply bolt it to the door and run down the stairs next to the elevator. As we were talking, we saw the guy enter the room and shut the door. This was our chance. "Fucking go," my boyfriend said. And without a second thought, the 3 of us absolutely pegged it down the hallway to the door. It had several locks, and I could feel myself sweating and prickling profusely with fear as my boyfriend was quickly fumbling open the locks. As the last lock opened, I heard the men in the other room talking progressively louder, as if they were getting nearer. And finally the door opens, and we fly down the staircase at the speed of fucking light. My heart was thumping in my chest, any trace of alcohol now pumped out of my system with the release of adrenaline. But we don't stop running until we were out of the building, and we carry the fuck on all the way back to the outside of our hotel we were staying at. So there's my story. Who knows what his intentions were? Was this simply a misunderstanding? And was he truly waiting for people to arrive? Or was he planning something more sinister? Did he lurk us to his flat to gang up on us with his other friends? Who knows, but I'm glad I got the hell out of there and never found out. A few years ago, I went to Vancouver for work, and a friend of mine who lived nearby came and stayed with me one night so we could go out to the bar. Neither of us knew the city well, so we went to a pub next door to my hotel. We were having drinks and a hockey game is on, so my friend starts chatting about the game with the cute guy at the table next to us. Their table had about 4 or 5 20-something years old guys there, and we are chatting with them and having a good time. I'm married and made that clear from the beginning, but my friend was single and was loving the attention and flirting from one guy in particular. The game ends and people are clearing out of the pub. The guys say they're going to a party nearby and we should come. I don't want to go, but my friend does. Most of the guys get into one car and leave, and the one who's most interested in talking to us and his quite considerably more drunk friends stay behind because, and I quote, "the other car is too full," and they offer to take a taxi with us. My friend is really into this guy, who was admittedly very good looking, and insists she wants to go to this stupid party, so I relent and agree. She's foolish and would have gone without me if I hadn't joined her. We get to this beautiful huge house about 10 minutes away, and there's no one there. All the lights were off. I ask where's the party, and he says his friends are on the way. This is his house. We walk inside and it looks like a staging house. New modern furniture, generic artwork on the walls, no personal photos anywhere. Alarm bells are ringing in my head, and I start interrogating him. I thought we were going to a party. Why are we at your house? My friends are meeting us here. We're gonna go from here, he said. How can you afford this big house at your age? Even basic housing in Vancouver is very expensive, and this was an easily $2 million house. I work in sales, he said. Are you sure you live here? This place looks really nicely decorated for a 20-something-year-old guy. Ha, yes I do, he replied. My friend then gets annoyed with me asking so much questions and tells me to knock it off. He offers us a drink and I ask for coffee. I kept, quote, joking like, do the real owners of this house have coffee? Do you know where to find it? He wants to give my friend a, quote, tour of upstairs, and I give her this serious look, and she gives me a don't cockblock me here look. So I say I'll just sit here and have a seat in the living room, where his very drunk friend has been slightly slumped in the chair since we walked in. My friend and the guy go upstairs. Drunk friend starts to mutter, and I'm catching bits and pieces. Shouldn't have come. Don't know us. Alone. Shouldn't be here. And what did you say? Never mind. Shouldn't stay. And then he wandered off somewhere in the house. So I'm sitting here panicking, wondering what the hell to do. I don't know where we are, so I don't even know what to tell a taxi driver, and I don't know the taxi number to call in the first place. I decide to use my GPS to find out roughly what address we're at, and I Google a taxi company nearby and call a taxi immediately. Tell them I don't know the address of the house, and just to park on the street and call me when they arrive. I will walk down and meet them. Then I go upstairs, burst into the bedroom, and tell my friend we are leaving right now and a taxi is on the way. Of course the guy protests, and my friend is frustrated and wants to sleep with this guy, but she sees the fear in my face and begrudgingly agrees. I have no idea what was actually going on with the house or what he had planned, but I'm so glad my idiot friend finally listened to me. Oh, we were there for about 30 minutes total. His friend never showed up, and I don't think we were ever gonna go to a party. I was a college freshman, and it was the first weekend of syllabus week, meaning two things. Every class was nothing but a bore. Everyone anticipated the easy weekend to get trashed. The party I attended was in this warehouse setting. There was a huge open space with tons of people in small circle cliques conversating and chugging bottles. Occasionally the DJ would play a one-hit wonder and everybody would swarm around from the side walls and jump around yelling like banshees. Admittedly, it got awkward as hell, and the alcohol that was given to me only made me tired and a bit dizzy. A little too dizzy. Nevertheless, me and my group still frequented these. One night, I decided to hang around the beer pong tables. I lied and said to my friends that I was going to call next. A while after what seemed like a never-ending game of beer pong, a guy approached me. He was shorter than me but stocky. Definitely weighed more than me, with all the weight being nothing but pure muscle. He wore a polo shirt and baggy jeans and rocked a buzz cut. Yo homie, you good? He said, reaching his hand out to shake it. Exchanging a handshake, I told him that yes, I was fine, and I was just waiting for my turn to play beer pong. With a laugh, he patted my shoulder and looked me in the eyes and said, yo, fuck beer pong. Let's go pick up some girls. This is college. I agreed, only because my friends had not returned to where I was after what seemed like a very long time. I told myself I'd just follow him into the crowd and ditch him once his back was turned, or when he started talking up a female, and I just looked for my group. Weaving through the people, we ended up in the middle of the floor, with the two of us being pushed around by groups of piss-drunk people. I got me a live one. Come on, she has friends, he said, locking his eyes to a trio of blondies, motioning their hips in a circular motion to the music. This was my chance to leave, and as I turned the other way and started to walk, a guy had bumped into me, drenching me in his drink. The guy quickly apologized and started to take off his button up and tried to hand it to me. The buzzcut dude whom was trying to pick up chicks grabbed my shoulder from behind and got in front of me and started to push the guy who had dropped his drink on me and yelled at him as well. This is where shit goes completely off the rail. The buzzcut guy starts talking insanely, shouting that he was going to kill him if he ever tried to fuck with me again, that he would stab him in the neck repeatedly and stab his neck between his biceps. He turned around to me and asked if I was okay, told me not to worry because he was quote strapped. Saying this, he lifted his polo revealing a gun, a knife, a taser, and a small bottle of liquid. To this day, I don't know what it was. I'm sure he's planning on dropping a roofie at some point in the night or something. Anyway, I had no idea how to react instead of reassuring myself that I was okay, before this guy went apeshit on this poor dude's accident of a spilled drink. We had caused quite the commotion, and because of this, a circle swarmed around us, and my friends were finally at my side. I whispered in the ear of my best bud that we needed to get the fuck away, and get away from this guy. No questions asked. We started to walk quickly, which was a huge mistake. The buzzcut psycho was confused and angry I had walked away without a word and started to follow us and shouting at me to wait up. The moment we hit the outside, we bolted to the car. I explained to my friends what happened. With my blood pumping, I'm looking at the rear view mirror, and as we leave our car, the crazy fuck was outside on the street looking around everywhere, and in his hand I saw him holding the handle of his gun tucked into his jeans. A couple of weeks after this encounter, we had gotten an email by a student at the neighboring university 5 minutes from ours that a kid was arrested for attempted murder of his roommate. The guy's name was actually given. Looking him up on social media, it was indeed the person I met at that crazy party. So, to the crazy guy at the party, let's not meet again. I've never posted in this sub, but a story I read reminded me of a situation I went through. This happened about 3 years ago when I was a freshman in college. I was hanging out with 3 of my girlfriends, Sarah, Ashley, and Brenda. We met up with a large group of about 20 people. Sarah knew some of them, but only friends of friends. We decided to go with them anyway. We met up in a parking lot of some nearby dorms, and we're gonna ride to the party together. There were 5 cars and trucks to choose from, so Ashley and Brenda jumped in some guy's truck and left me and Sarah to choose a car. We chose a pretty nice car that belonged to some guy we didn't know named Jason. So we all ended up going to a bonfire on the outside of town. Drinks are flowing, and it's pretty fun. Jason starts hanging around me and Sarah and flirting with us. He wasn't really my type, but he was nice, so I wasn't gonna be rude. His friends decided they wanted to head back to the car to smoke, so we all walked together. We got to his car, and he was coming on pretty strong. The car was filled with people, so he had me sit on his lap. I tried to sit or stand so he didn't get too handsy. The guy with the pot ended up pulling out wax. I've heard about wax before, but at that point, I never smoked it. If you don't know what it is, it's a higher concentration of THC or something like that. I'm honestly not even too sure. Anyways, he pulls out a crack pipe and starts smoking the wax out of it. Being the dumb girl I was, I try it. I got way too high for my own good. Jason starts heavily flirting with me when we head back to the fire. I tried to nicely avoid him, but he was coming on strong. I asked Sarah where Ashley and Brenda had went, and we discovered they went back to the dorms without telling us. Great. I immediately felt uncomfortable. I was with strangers and higher than I'd ever been in my life. I asked Jason to take us back to the dorms, and it was like I flipped a switch. He instantly got furious and told me if I wasn't hooking up with him, he wasn't taking us home. I started panicking because me and Sarah didn't know anyone else there. Jason decides it's time to leave, so we pile in his car. Jason instructs everyone to get in the back and tells me very aggressively that I'm sitting in front. We leave and he's driving like a maniac. He won't tell me where he's going, and he's going about 60 in residential neighborhoods. I honestly thought we were being abducted. We had all been drinking and smoking, so I know he shouldn't have not been driving. The whole time, I'm going back and forth on whether or not to call the cops because I did not feel safe at all in this car. At one point, a car cut him off in a 2-lane road, so Jason speeds up and gets next to the car. We are on the incoming traffic lane, and he pulls a gun out from under his seat and rolls his window down. I press back as hard as I can against my seat and try to roll the window up. Jason is yelling and cussing at them and me, and speeds up and passes the car. I'm trying to calm him down, telling him just to take us home and to put the gun away because it's not worth it, and he finally puts it back under his seat. We eventually pull into some house and Jason tells us to get out of the car. We get in and Jason is still furious. He's pacing around and yelling. He's explaining to the people there that we don't want to hook up and calling us every name in the book. He tells the guys at the house that he has to go to a party to, quote, find some bitches. Yeah, I know, he was pretty trashy. The guys at the house tell me and Sarah we have to get the hell out of his house. I told them we don't have a ride and it's freezing outside, but they kick us out anyways. Me and Sarah begin walking down the road and hear Jason's car start up. We run and hide in some bushes by the front door and watch him drive by slowly at least 3 times in 15 minutes. We call Ashley and Brenda and they came and got us. It took them about 45 minutes to get us once we could figure out what street we were on. It took me a while to forgive Ashley and Brenda for leaving me and Sarah at the party and not telling us. Thankfully, we both ended up getting home safely that night, and I have not had any more encounters with this weirdo Jason. This summer I finally got my license and a car, but my mom was scared of me driving down the block, so I decided to let her use me for errands or to drive my brother around, whose license just got suspended. My brother asked me to drive him to a party, and since I'm 18 and have pretty good social skills, I thought it wouldn't be a problem. My brother's 24, and the guy throwing the party was 28. I played some beer pong with my brother, but didn't drink anything since I was driving. After a while, I walked to the kitchen to get some water, and the party host followed me and was asking to mix me a drink, and then proceeded to ask me all these personal questions. Another guest walks in and distracts the guy, so I left. At this point, I didn't think anything strange. My brother's friend bought me some nachos, and I sat down next to this girl to eat. The party host and 2 other guys sat down with us and started talking. The girl got up and went to check on her boyfriend. The guys kept talking about their past and about their 10-year high school reunion coming up. I felt really young and awkward sitting there with these guys who were already 10 years older than me, but this one new guy who recently got out of the Navy was really nice and telling me all these submarine stories. The host sat down in a chair next to me and took my nachos and told me he wouldn't give them back unless I gave him my number. I gave him the number to this useless prepaid phone with minutes at my house that I thought wasn't a big deal. The host asked me if I wanted to see the cats that were being kept in this room, and I said sure. I realized that this was naive, but I was surrounded by 6 to 10 people, and my brother was nowhere to be seen. As we walk into the room, the guy locks the door and gets on the bed, and I pet one of the cats on the floor. He pats the bed for me to sit, and I said that we should probably let the cat sleep. He told me that he was just trying to get me alone, and told me to tell him more about myself. I got really nervous and started stuttering, and saying I was 18, which I had told him and his friends earlier, and what high school I recently graduated from. Then, there was a knock on the door, and luckily it was my brother's friend, who said my brother was looking for me. I walked out, and was trying to avoid the party host, but he kept following me around. Finally, my brother was ready to leave, and I drove him back home and told him what happened. The next day, I noticed a text on the extra phone we have at my house, and it was the party host guy. He was saying all this nonsense about how he thought I was beautiful, young, and exciting. I told him to please back off, and I'm just 18, and I even just recently got out of a relationship. He would keep texting me about how he can throw parties for me at his house, or I could come over to his house for some privacy. He kept asking where I lived, and just didn't take no for an answer. He would call and ask to pick me up and take me out and stuff. I decided just to turn off that phone and keep it hidden for the rest of the summer, and now that I turned it back on, I deleted all the messages. I guess ignoring him finally worked. I live in a normal neighborhood. I can't really say that the people here are shady. Most of them are just old. To give a little background on my town, most of the streets are parallel to each other, especially the section I live in. There's a lot of young people moving in because many of the old people in the town are moving into nursing homes or unfortunately dying. I think it would be safe to say I know most of the people who live in the area. Not personally, but I can recognize faces. Last year, me and my friends decided to go out trick-or-treating one final time. We were acting like angsty teenagers who thought it wasn't cool anymore, but we already got in costumes and wanted some candy. However, we thought it wasn't cool anymore, but looking back, I don't think trick-or-treating is safe anymore. Anyway, I had to play a field hockey game after school, so I was itching to hang out with my friends. I finally headed home and got my costume on. At this point, it was getting dark, so my mom demanded I bring a flashlight. She's very protective and kind of strict. My father, on the other hand, is the opposite. He's more willing to let me go places on my own and convince my mom it would be okay if I went trick-or-treating with a group of friends. My mom doesn't like there not being a parent around, but she knew we would stay within a couple of streets. Eventually, she let up and allowed me to go. My friends began to show up at my house, but by the time we left, it was pitch black out. Once again, my mother warned me about strangers. I scoffed at her, trying to shake off the embarrassment of being lectured by my mom in front of my friends. I knew she was right though. Maybe a group of high school girls could take down a predator, but I know I couldn't by myself. I stayed as close as I could with my friends for most of the night, keeping an eye out for any weird figures or killer clowns, since there were rumors of some terrorizing in an elementary school a few towns over. Everything seemed to be going well, and we were all having a good time, apart from trying to avoid our classmates out of sheer humility for trick-or-treating. All my friends and I made some good memories that night. Then it happened. It was around 8:45, and some of my friends were tired and wanted to be picked up. We gradually made it back to my house, where they phoned their parents and left. I was a little upset. It might have been my inner child in me, but I wanted more candy. I knew this was quite possibly my last year trick-or-treating ever. I wasn't ready to give it up yet. My one friend, we'll call her Nancy, did not want to stop yet either. After all my other friends left, we asked my parents if we could go out for another 30 minutes. My mom relucted, however my dad told her that I was old enough and most people wouldn't answer doors this late anyway, so we would be back pretty soon anyway. It was about 9:10 at this point. Nancy and I went to the street over in the opposite direction we went with our group previously. I remember feeling uncomfortable for some reason, but brushing it off as I turned on my flashlight. It was pitch black and the sidewalks were bumpy and cracked because the town is too lazy to fix them. I had a pretty bright flashlight that could shine a good 20 feet ahead of me. We made it to the next street and looked down. There were barely any porch lights on. I guess people figured the little kids were done and decided it was the end of the night. However, Nancy and I were not willing to give up and started at the first house. No answer. Okay, so we went across the street to a house that had a porch light on. No answer from that house either. I still wasn't willing to stop though. We tried a few more houses and got no answers. Nancy suggested we try 3 other houses, and if no one answered, then we would go back to my place. I agreed, sadly knowing that no one would give us candy this late into the night, and that this would be the end. That's when I saw him out of the corner of my eye. It was a black figure walking down the road towards the house me and Nancy were standing at. He was wearing all black with his face down and a hood over his head. Something about him made my stomach lurch. I discreetly pointed at him to Nancy. She said she saw him a few houses before, just turning onto the street. This made me feel even more uneasy. Quickly he began to approach us, with his head down and his hands in his sweatshirt pocket. Looking back, who knows what he could have been hiding in there. The street was dead quiet except for me and Nancy, so he must have heard us. I instructed for us to go to the house across the street to make it seem like we were trick-or-treating and never noticed the man. We went to the house and knocked on the door. I was secretly praying someone would answer, so the man could not get near, but no one did answer. I was really freaking out now. I turned back around and he was still walking on the street in front of the house right next to us. Then I realized he had crossed the street too. He was right by us. A wave of panic overtook me. I grabbed Nancy's arm and sprinted to the house he had just passed. Then he circled around and began following us in the same direction. I knew I had to do something. He began walking faster and faster towards us. Nancy and I sprinted for it. There's a good amount of space between this street and mine, but I was on track and was willing to do anything to get away from this psychopath. He didn't run, but when I finally looked back, I saw him quickly walking the same way, still with his head down. From what I could tell, he seemed fairly young, maybe in his early 30s. I didn't recognize anyone like this from the area. Nancy and I were still running though. Finally, we made it to my street and we hid near some bushes at the end. Then I realized we still had our flashlights on us, and that's how he was so easily able to locate us. We shut them off, crouched near the bushes, and waited. I knew that if we tried to run to my house, he would see us. There wasn't enough time to make it there without him getting to the end of the street and seeing us. I was also terrified that he would find out where I lived. Never bring someone who's following you back to your house. Nancy and I finally saw him. He stood in the middle of the street just peering down it. I could see his eyes. That's how close we were. They looked so blank and menacing. He knew we were somewhere, just not in the bushes that were only 10 feet away. After a few moments, he carried on walking. Nancy and I waited until he was in the next street and booked it back to my house. I told my parents, but my father only laughed, and my mother looked too tired to care. My brother sat there and made fun of me for, quote, being too paranoid. I'm never going trick-or-treating again. Who knows what could have happened to me that night, or what that man was capable of. Later, there was a news story about children who had been abducted a few towns over. Instead, it could have been me and Nancy. So, creepy Halloween stalker, let's not meet again. First time posting on Reddit. I had a strange unsolved experience as a kid that's been on my mind a lot recently, and decided this is a place to share. The first half of the story takes place on Halloween of 1991. Quick bit of background. I was a 7-year-old boy at the time, and my sister was only a few months old. I lived in Long Island, New York, on the border of the area that kind of acted as an unspoken separation between the more affluent area and the lower income, quote, hood area. My dad owned a bar across the street from the train tracks that was extremely popular in the 80s and was still riding the tail end of that boom. My father did very well for himself. My father and his business were known around town. I think this may have to do with what happened. He eventually squandered everything on a heroin addiction, but that's a different story. And for the record, I've nothing but love and respect for him despite this. So it was Halloween. My mom was working the night shift at my dad's bar. My sister was home with a teenage babysitter. My dad taken me and my friend trick-or-treating. This was the first year I was able to go out at night, so I was super stoked. When we get home, there are cops at my house. The babysitter is crying, and my mom came home early. Earlier, the sitter was alone with my sister. She got a phone call from an unknown woman asking to speak to Little, and then she said my name. She said I was not there, and the woman stated that she had a gift for me and would call back. This woman called back a few times saying something similar, and she had began to insist that she was going to come deliver her gift. Eventually she called and said to look into the mailbox. This is when the sitter called the police. The police found a pirate skull Halloween decoration that would talk and shake when you clapped, as well as several candy bars. My whole family was really bugged out by this. I was scared, but also kinda liked the skull thing, and convinced my parents after much protest to let me keep it. My parents were for a few weeks after that on edge. They hated the toy. They tried to work with the police, but there wasn't much they could do, and the whole thing kinda went cold. Fast forward to the following summer, 1992. My best friend and I decided to have a car wash in front of his house, which was diagonally across the street from my house. We had out buckets, soap, a hose, and a sign. You get the picture. This black car rolls up, and it was a 1980s Crown Vic or something that looked like that. One of those big cars that steers like a boat. Rolls down the window, and there's a woman sitting in the driver's seat. She has short white hair. I told my parents she was old because of the hair, but looking back, she could have been young as 40. She says, "Hi, my name. Do you know who I am?" I said, "No." She goes, "I'm the one who gave you those nice presents on Halloween." My jaw drops, and I freeze up and just start staring at her. Then, like something out of a movie, she begins to laugh manically, and then speeds off. I ran home and told my parents. That was the end of it. and they never figured out who it was. My father has speculated that this person may have believed that he was wealthy and maybe was trying to get a ransom. Maybe she was a scorned ex-lover. I don't know. I've speculated many things, but will likely never know at this point. Also, I'm now 35, and this was a lifetime ago. Sorry if this story has an underwhelming payoff at the end, but it has bugged me for years and I wanted to share it. In the past year, I've had several of my dad's old friends find and reach out to me on Facebook. My dad and I have the same name and face, so I was easy to find. 2 of them were women. One of them made me a little uncomfortable because she kept pushing to hang out, and she's a lot older than me. Like, go to the bar hangout. I said no, of course, but she asked a lot of personal questions. That's what brought the story back to the forefront of my mind. I'm getting a weird feeling in my gut that this woman, or the other one that found me on Facebook, is the same woman that stalked me as a child. That thought gives me a chill, but I would really like to know who the person was and why they stalked me. So this takes place past Halloween, when it was my first semester of college. I'm a freshman female. This was Halloween. While my amazing roommate was getting drunk and partying with my ex-friends for the 100th time, I was alone and bored in my dorm room. Granted, I didn't want to risk the chance of COVID, but I couldn't stand being in that damn room any longer. To hell with it, I wanted to party. So I start looking around on my phone. I forgot how exactly I came across her, but a girl who's a self-proclaimed freshman invited me to a group of 10 people to this party her, quote, friends were throwing. Social distanced and everything, she promised us. Luckily, my couple of friends wanted to jump this party. Granted, we social distance and wear masks. The girl sent us the address and told us to tell the people there Monica invited us. Well, that's where things got weird. One of my ex-friends decided screw it, let's not wait any longer for us to get ready. Granted, I was still putting on my makeup, and went to the party himself. When he got there, he did exactly as, quote, Monica said, and the guy there refused to let him in and called him a slur. Granted, this ex-friend was a little weird, so we thought, hey, what the heck? We'll just leave if we sense something is off. After driving there in my friend Steve's car, my friend and I, Mary, got out of the back seats and were instantly dumbfounded, like we weren't certainly expecting a castle or anything, but this place was a literal dump, and the neighborhood was extremely dirty and dark. Well, even though we got the creeps from the place, we did just spend 30 minutes getting there, so screw it. We walked to the door and this guy who is absolutely plastered and on at least 3 different drugs answers. We tell him we're Monica's friends. Confused, he looks at Mary and I and just silently nods and opens the door for us to come in, ignoring Steve completely. Well, what met us certainly was not what we expected. There was about 20 frat guys huddled around a table filled with booze and drugs, silently watching a girl, the only female there mind you, dancing. No masks, no nothing. We were the only ones wearing them. Confused and horrified, we silently head down a huge black staircase that was smack dab in the middle of the cramped, quote, living room. What greeted us was not another group of people or Monica and her friends that supposedly invited us. Instead, I kid you not, at least 8 black locked doors that looked like they came from a Saw movie or something. After trying one of the doors, Steve looked in horror as one of the adjacent doors slowly opened. What looked like 2, at least middle-aged greasy men came crawling out, looking at Mary and I in a weirdly perverted way, unlocking and entering one of the numerous doors. We could only watch in horror as another, quote, bouncer-looking man came in out of nowhere and started screaming at Steve. Who the hell invited you guys here? Monica, we all reply, really confused. The dude just looked bemused and just goes, who the hell is Monica? We take that as our cue to leave, and we hardly run up fast enough before the bouncer starts to shove and tries to tackle Steve towards the ground. Leaving the crackhead house, confused as hell, we finally see, quote, Monica and 2 other scandalously clothed girls, literally looking as white as a sheet. She gives a small awkward giggle and wave, and we floor the hell out of there, never looking back. Yep, Don't go to random parties in large cities you're unfamiliar with. The weird part, or not really so weird part, was that Monica was trying to get me to come alone, knowing I was female. In all honesty, I think that people at the party and Monica only had a problem with Steve and totally did not expect Mary to bring her boyfriend or for me to come with friends. Afterwards, Steve told us he totally believed that it was either a drug house or a prostitution ring that had tried luring Mary and I in. So, to Monica and the weird traffickers slash drug smugglers, whatever the hell you were, let's not meet again, and I do not know what you were planning, but it certainly wasn't good. Edit, I didn't call the police, but I made an informal report a couple of days later. Basically, the cops told me they would check out the house, but they'd have to inform the owners who sent them, which is me. Well, I'm not putting my life nor friends or family's lives in danger, so I said to leave it, but I gave them the address and the name of the girl who invited me, a student. I didn't know if they did anything, so I doubt it. It's a large city. An armed robbery occurred a minute away from my apartment a couple of days ago, so who knows. This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My brother and I were home alone since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They had tasked us with handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. This bumped my brother and I out because we had made plans to go trick-or-treating with a few friends. Our parents told us that we were too old to still be trick-or-treating and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house to hang out there. My friends declined my invitation to come over because they still wanted to go trick-or-treating, so that left me home alone with my brother handing out candy. A lot of people stopped by our house, and by 10 p.m., almost all the candy was gone. My brother and I decided we'd just eat the rest. We were sitting on the couch watching a scary movie, stuffing our faces with candy, when there was a knock on the door. I stormed off the couch, wondering who the hell could have been knocking on the door this late. I assumed it was just some late-night trick-or-treaters. Even if that was the case, I had turned off the porch light and the Halloween decorations off, which should have been a dead giveaway that we were out of candy, or that we weren't home, so I assumed it was my parents. Being cautious, I looked through the peephole and saw a suspicious man standing in front of the porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face. The only detail of his face I could spot was that he had a beard and dry, crusty lips. There was no way this guy was trick-or-treating, because he wasn't wearing a costume, and was far too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed in the front of his pocket in his hoodie, and he also looked very thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There was no way in hell I was going to open that door. Still looking through the peephole, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed desperate for us to open the door, and was shaking a bit. It wasn't cold outside, definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling. He was giving me a bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy," I shouted at him. I watched as a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you alone in there?" the man asked, almost in a mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry. "Should I call the police?" my little brother asked, gripping his cell phone. The man let out a low grumble and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there." I continued to watch through the peephole. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pocket, and he was still shaking a bit. I began to wonder if he was armed. I decided to take action and spoke to him in a more intimidating voice. "Get the hell away from my house or I'll call the police," I shouted. His smile faded, and he bared his teeth. His teeth were piss yellow, and I concluded that he was probably some homeless crackhead. He had a look of fury plastered on his face. Fortunately, he left without trying to break in, probably because he knew I wasn't messing around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole until I saw him completely off our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to call the police. My brother and I were a bit paranoid after this and watched TV until our parents came home. We didn't tell them about the man, since he hadn't really tried to harm us. Now when I think back to this, I wish we had called the police, because maybe we could have prevented a murder. You see, the next day, we found out that the elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her lying in the front porch, covered in blood lying on her front porch. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and back. My brother and I immediately knew who had done it, and we told the police what we knew. They couldn't do much from the information we had given them, since we haven't seen many details of his face. They went out on a hunt for the man, but they never caught him. I blame myself for that poor old lady's murder, because I could have prevented it from happening just by calling the police. I think that the most disturbing thing of all is the fact that he didn't take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left completely untouched. He could have gone in and taken whatever he wanted since her door was just wide open. This means he just wanted to kill. That was his only intention. He didn't want money, jewelry. He only had the urge to murder. So to the creepy crackhead Halloween slasher, let's not meet again. This happened so many years ago. I was in the 3rd or 4th grade in the early 1980s. I lived in a very rural area with many small towns surrounded by woods. One day, I was so excited to have permission from my parents to go directly home from school with a friend on her bus. Side note, my parents both worked long hours. Unlike so many of my friends that had stay-at-home moms at the time, I was normally a latchkey kid. So, anyway, I was going to go home with my friend on her bus for the first time. I even had a nice note from my mom about my trip home with my friend to hand to the bus driver after we got on the bus. I was super excited because my friend really lived in the woods. I had gone to her birthday party over the summer and we collected fireflies and slept in an actual tent. This was so cool to me because I lived close to the town center and didn't even have a tent. So here we are on the bus. We sat in the middle at first, then slowly moved up towards the front of the bus as kids got off. My friend lived just before the town line on a road that headed out of town, so hers was the last stop. Towards the end of the ride, we were right up front behind the driver, who played some awesome tunes via popular radio station WAAF. My friend, who was a bit of an odd little duck, was bopping to the beat of the song on the radio, while I was just looking out the front window of the bus directly behind the driver. Just then the driver turned his head to me and says, "Hey, what would you girls do if I didn't drop you off?" I was instantly spooked and looked towards my friend, who was still bopping away to the song. What? I stammered. I was not used to talking to adults. I don't know, but I knew what I heard. "Oh, nothing," he replied. He was just pulling up to my friend's stop and just pulled over to let us out. I've thought about this many times over the years, wondering why would he have said that. Then I wonder, what if my friend's mom wasn't home? Would he have stopped or driven us out in the middle of nowhere? Also, since this was her everyday bus, why wasn't that creep a worry for my friend? I've since gone on to grow up and raise kids in the same area, but I can't help to think about why the driver picked that day to get all weird. I never told any adults as I was a kid, and after we got off the bus, it was no longer my worry. But yeah, creepy bus driver, let's not meet again. Actually, as a fully grown woman, let's meet and I could kick the crap out of your creepy ass. When I was 10 years old, my family relocated from Delaware to South Carolina for my dad's job. We had lived near all our family and had never moved before. One of Dad's selling points about the move was that people in the South were so friendly. I had just finished 5th grade and would be starting 6th in South Carolina. I rode the bus to and from school in Delaware, so there wasn't a lot of anxiety about riding the bus after we moved. 6th grade started, and I was excited about my new school and loved my teacher. Dad was right, people in the South are polite and friendly. Well, most of them are. Anyway, one day in the fall, I got off the bus at my stop after school, and a man in a dark green Volkswagen Beetle that was behind the bus pulled off the main road and called out to me as I was walking towards my house. I turned around and proudly even smiled at him. I had no real stranger danger fears at the time. I walked up to the driver's side of the car to see what he wanted. I figured he'd wanted to ask for directions or something, and I planned to tell him I just moved here and didn't know. But, oh boy, he didn't need directions. He was going after something entirely different. He smiled at me and said something I didn't catch, comprehend, or understand. So I said, "What? Excuse me?" to get him to repeat it. I got a little closer so I could hear him better, and he said, "Wanna come over?" which wasn't what he said before. So at the time, I didn't know what that meant, except that maybe I kind of did, and knew that was a bad thing to say to someone my age. I turned and ran to my neighbor's house, and didn't look back. I was crying and they called my mom and my parents and called the police about it. A couple days later, the police department had a sketch artist come meet my parents and I at the station to work with me. I did the best I could, but honestly, I wasn't studying the man's features or even trying to remember his face at the time of the incident, so I don't know how accurate it was. My parents and I thought that this was the end of it. Nobody really thought they would find him. The cops were saying things like if they found him, he could go to jail for a while for his obscene question to me. My mom was nervous if it would go as far as me testifying in court, and she didn't feel good about putting me through that. She was worried that even as an undeveloped 10-year-old child, the defense would attempt to shame me in some way or say I was asking for it. About a week later, I was again getting off the bus, and I hear a car horn beep. I look to see, and it was the same guy, same Volkswagen Beetle, smiling and waving at me. I was stunned. I blankly waved back for some reason, but at the same time memorized his tag number. I repeated it to myself over and over as I ran to my house to write it down and call my mom. Cops were notified, and the guy was identified. He lived about 20 minutes away in another town. His local cops knew and were friendly with his family, the good old boy system, so he didn't go to jail, but apparently they told him to stay away from me. I never saw him again, and hope I never do. I wonder how much times he might have followed the bus and watched me that I never knew about. Dear pervert predator, let's never meet again. So, when I was in high school, it was my senior year. I was about 5'3" and about 95 pounds. I was at the park down the street from my house waiting for the school bus. Usually my boyfriend, who was already graduated, would drive me to school, but he was quote busy. I later found out he was cheating. Well, there was usually a few of us girls there waiting, but this day, I was the only one. So I sat at a bench and had one headphone in and one out so I could listen to music and to my surroundings. I've always been cautious of what's going on around me. As I waited, a black Honda pulled up and I immediately noticed it. I kept an eye on it because I had a bad feeling about it. I wasn't making it obvious that I was watching it because I didn't want to look crazy, but after a few minutes, 2 men got out. I immediately texted my boyfriend that I was at the park and these guys were creeping me out. Of course he didn't text back, so I copy and pasted the same text to my cousins, who were home. I lived with my aunt and 2 other guy cousins. I wanted someone to know the car make and color, plus it was 2 men. I didn't get any responses though. When they got out the car, they started to walk towards me, so I got up from the bench, walked towards the street because the bus was supposed to be there any minute. The driver actually ended up being a little late though. As I stood by the street, these men walked up to me and I could feel the bad energy. One guy said hello, as the other stood there staring me down. I just did a small smile and nod, then looked away. Then the same guy, I'll call him number 1, asked how old I was. I didn't respond. I could tell the other guy, number 2, was getting mad that I wasn't feeding into it. Then number 1 kept asking me yes or no questions like, do you have a boyfriend? Do you live close? Do you do drugs? We have some. Do you want some? Then number 2 asked me if I knew what the black market was. I felt a cold rush go over my body and got the chills. Number 2, who was quiet the whole time, started to tell me they just got back from Russia, but the way he said it was so scary, almost intimidating. I knew they were from somewhere else because they had strong accents, but I couldn't pinpoint the place. They kept telling me to go to their car because they have drugs. I said no thank you. Trust me, I wasn't a straight-edge student in high school, but I was not stupid either. I would never get into someone's car that I didn't know. Then number 1 asked me if I have a car. I said no, and that my bus is almost here. Sorry, I have to go. And by some sort of miracle, the bus rounded the corner and the guys backed off. They had been inching closer and closer as they were asking me questions. But before the bus got to me, number 1 handed me a card and said he has a car shop and to call him sometime if I needed anything. He even stated he'd give me a free car. The card looked shifty, and I didn't want to grab it, but I knew I needed that number on it to report it, so I took it and walked off super fast. Finally, the bus stopped and picked me up. As soon as I got on, I started to cry. I had a complete meltdown. It was like all of the adrenaline was keeping my mind and body aware and focused while the men were there, but as soon as I was safe, my body and mind gave out. Thankfully, there weren't many people on the bus, so the driver calmed me down before we took off, and I explained to her what happened. When she looked around for the car, they were gone. She said she saw them around me, but thought I knew them because they were so close to me. The driver called into her dispatch, saying that there was an incident so that they could notify the school. She continued to pick all the other students up, but when we got to the school, she walked me into the office. I was absolutely terrified to be alone. The principal came out and so did the campus security. They were so sweet and gentle with me as they brought me back to the principal's office. Both were men and proceeded to ask me questions about the other men, their car, and the questions the creeps had asked me. I cried the whole time. Then I pulled out the card the guy gave me and handed it to the principal. He looked at the security and said he was going to call it and act like my dad, so he did. It was on speaker, and number 1 answered. I knew his voice as if it was burned into my brain. It took everything in me not to have a panic attack. The principal asked the guy if he could get him a car at a good price, and the guy played dumb. The principal said his daughter, me, gave him the card. As soon as he said that, one hung up. They tried calling again, and the phone was shut off, then eventually disconnected. I could see a shift in the principal and security as soon as the phone clicked. The security got on his phone and called the police and had them come to the school. It was as if they finally knew it was real, like my crazy story wasn't made up. The principal excused himself and the security guard, and they talked for a minute in the hall. I could hear everything they were saying. She's so lucky to be alive. This is serious. We need to call her parents to come get her. When the police got there, they came into the office that I was sitting in and asked me for the story again, and in front of the principal and security guard. I feel like they wanted to see if I was being 100% honest, so I obliged. The officers were straight up with me and told me it sounded like they were watching us girls at the park, because they had chosen the one day that one of us were alone. He also said the card was being used as bait to get me to go to wherever they wanted. I felt sick. I couldn't breathe. The school called my aunt, but she didn't pick up. The only person that picked up first was my boyfriend. One of the officers talked to him as the other finally got a hold of my aunt. My boyfriend ended up picking me up and taking me home, and I cried the whole time. When I got there, my grandma, uncle, aunt, and mom and cousins were all there out front. The women were all in tears, and the men were all livid, but worried for me. A week later, some girl at another local high school, not far from the park, was saved by other students. She was being dragged into a black Honda by 2 guys. The other kids stood up and grabbed her and pulled her out the car. The principal called me into his office, and that's how I found out. They also had the same officers there and had me choose the 2 guys out of a picture lineup. I pointed them out pretty fast. They were caught. It was in fact those 2 guys that talked to me that were the ones who tried grabbing the girl, a freshman girl. I felt worried for her and sad. She went through worse than I did, and I felt almost free again. Still scarred, but not looking over my shoulder as often. I couldn't believe they were caught. After that, my family teamed up to drive me to school for the rest of the year. My boyfriend, now ex, also took me some days. I'm thankful to be alive and well, and I'm even more thankful for that girl who was saved by the courageous kids at her high school. This encounter happened to my mom when she was in middle school, early 70s. Her family lived outside of town, so she rode the bus to and from school. She was in 6th grade and had a quote boyfriend who also rode her bus. They would sit together and hold hands, but they were not inappropriate with their interactions. The bus driver took notice of their relationship and started to make comments to them. He'd asked if they kissed a lot, and if they quote tongued, and once even asked them if he sniffs her. Not knowing what to do, they just did their best to ignore him. On the last day of school, the bus route went as usual, except that the driver skipped my mom's stop. When he stopped at the next house, several miles away, she tried to get off the bus with one of her girlfriends. The kids all knew each other pretty well, and they were all friends. The driver stopped her from trying to get out and made her go sit back down. Every stop after that, she tried to get off the bus, and he'd tell her to go sit back down until she was the last one left on the bus. She was already terrified and crying. She kept trying to get out with every kid that was leaving off the bus, but he wouldn't let her. She said she doesn't remember if she was praying out loud or not, but she remembers just begging for an idea of how to get away. The driver told her to move to the front of the bus, right behind his seat. Instead, she picked up her things and moved to the very last seat. On her way, she set her books and things in the middle aisle, hoping that if he came after her, he would be slowed down by them. He finally started back down her road towards her house, but turned off into a dirt road leading back to some brush. She finally decided that if he even slowed down enough, she was going to get out the back emergency door and run for it. As he turned onto another dirt road, deeper into the brush, she happened to glance out the back window and see her dad and her older brother, he was an adult, in their truck following behind. She shouted up to the driver, "You better stop this bus right now." "That's my dad behind the bus." He stopped the bus and opened the doors to get her off, but she was too scared to move. Within a few seconds, her dad was on the bus standing up next to the driver so that she could walk around behind him. He told her to go get in the truck with her brother. As she sat in the truck, she could see her dad through the back window of the bus, going off on the guy. Verbally only, unfortunately. When her dad got back into the truck, he hugged her like never before, and she just lost it crying. She knew her dad was scared that she just escaped with her life. Now, this wasn't just a coincidence that her dad had found her. Every kid who got off the bus after they missed my mom's stop had gone home and told their parents that the driver wouldn't let her off the bus and that she was really scared and crying. The parents all called my grandparents to let them know the stories that they were getting. My grandparents never reported the incident to the police or the school, but they did talk to the owner of the bus company, and they said they saw the guy driving again. My mom believes that they didn't report it to the police because her dad had threatened the driver's life, and he would in turn report that to the police. My grandfather went to his grave without ever revealing what he had said to the bus driver. Several years later, my mom was talking about her mother-in-law, Grandma C, and about Grandma C's cousin, who was married to a guy from my mom's hometown. Grandma C was telling her about this guy in prison impregnating his 14-year-old stepdaughter. As an off-cut remark, she mentioned that he used to drive a school bus in the district where my mom went to school. My mom almost passed out at this news. She asked his name, and it was given the name of the bus driver who abducted her all those years ago. I know, I feel the same way that they should have said something to the police and had arrested him long before he found another potential victim. I believe they made a mistake in that regard, but I'm glad the creep ended up in prison. So, I had just gotten out of a pretty significant relationship with someone of 4 years, nearly engaged and moving in together, etc. When things fell apart, I took a good amount of time to be on my own and get my shit together again, when my friends began encouraging me to quote, get back out there. Needless to say, I wasn't wanting anything at this point, nor was I looking for anything, but they insisted that I at least go on a few casual dates. For practice maybe? Just to get my skills back up for when I was ready. I think they were honestly just worried because I became quite hermetic. So I matched with this girl who's from college for the summer. She's a little out of the way from me, but was eager to meet, seemed really friendly, and was really interested, was even willing to come to my area, etc. I really wasn't at all interested, to be truthful, but my friends again encouraged this, practice, whatever that means. A date doesn't mean commitment, whatever. I want to be very clear though that I was extremely honest and explicit with her that I was not looking for anything serious, or anything really at all. I was very forthcoming that I had just gotten out of something serious and I was just kind of encouraged to explore. She persisted and still wanted to meet, so we agreed to a casual lunch in a sports bar that week. I get there, and she was already waiting for me. I was a bit put off about how different she had looked than in her photos. Not trying to sound shallow or anything, but her pictures from Tinder were easily at least 5 years old, which I verified based on tattoos she had in person versus the one she had in her pictures, so I was a bit thrown off by that. I wasn't the least bit attracted to her, but I was there just to have new experiences anyway, right? So no big deal. I felt so bad because the entire time she seemed so incredibly shy and awkward. I even noticed her hand shaking when she reached for her glass, which I found endearing, honestly. So I did my best to get her talking and try to help her feel more relaxed. I asked her questions and chatted about things I figured you do on dates. Where she grew up, music she's into, school, etc. All to which I literally received one-word answers. It went on like this for about an hour, and she was just not working with me at all. But I had tried to keep room in my heart because it was clear she was feeling anxious, and I understand that on a personal level. She then pulls out this book and says, "I got this for you," and I responded very grateful, thanking her and asking her about it. Cause, hey, if someone wants to share a good read with me, I'm all for that. She looks at me funny and says, in a very sudden but odd tone, "You're kidding me, right?" I'm very confused and just look at her like, what? And she says, "This is your favorite book. You told me this was your favorite book." To which I said, "No, I've never heard of this before." So we concluded that she ultimately got me confused with someone else she must have been chatting with, which I honestly found hilarious. She was embarrassed, but I made light of it and found it funny, cause I get it. That's Tinder culture, I guess. So as we finish lunch, I'm still receiving one-word answers despite her funny moment. I kind of become a bit suggestive that we should conclude our date by saying I have to get back to feed my animals and do some laundry, etc. But she became very adamant about spending more time and asked if we could do something else. I was genuinely trying to be a decent person, so I agreed, and we found a nearby park to walk. That's where shit gets weird. We sat on a bench. Mind you, it's broad daylight. There's kids playing basketball nearby, folks jogging past. I start trying to make conversation yet again, but still get one-word answers. Then out of seemingly nowhere, without any warning whatsoever, she proceeds to just kiss me very aggressively, tongue and everything. I was honestly so shocked I stood there frozen, not knowing what the hell to do. I had this timid, shy woman who's really not made much conversation with me at all, who was so nervous she was visibly shaking, just turned into a freaking bear mauling my face in like 6 seconds. My head was spinning with confusion and anxiety, and I swear it felt like it lasted forever, and I just prayed for it to stop. I was so put off and honestly a bit afraid to do or say anything, like, what to even do in this situation. I was just hoping she'd pick up on my very obvious body language, that I wasn't reciprocating anything at all. I was completely unprepared for a situation like this. Then some really nasty guy walks by, starts catcalling, and literally begins setting us up into a three-way, and I'm just like, what the hell's going on? I need to get out of here. I was 1,000 different types of uncomfortable. I ended up managing to ward him off after telling him very politely no more than several times. All the while, she's just laughing, and I'm thinking, who even are you? Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde over here, what the hell? So he leaves, and I'm insisting now that I have to leave and go home. She seems to ignore what I'm saying and gets very close to my face again and says, "Did you like that? Do you think I'm sexy? Do you want me?" I was so goddamn nervous. I was like, I really need to get home. And she says, "Can I come?" And I told her firmly no. She literally tried to persuade me to let her come back to my place with me, and I had to say no more than 3 times. So finally I'm home, and frankly just kind of shaken up. I hadn't really done the dating thing in quite a long time, but that felt very abnormal. She texts me after she gets home and says if I'd like to go on a second date with her, and I was very kind, despite being made incredibly uncomfortable. And I told her that she was a very cool chick and I had a nice time, but I didn't feel anything there. It reminded her I wasn't looking for anything. She then text bombed me a bunch of crazy shit, saying how she didn't understand and was so confused, that she thought I was so into her and that things were going great. I did not respond to any of these because now she's continuing to cross my boundaries. I said what I needed to say, and I thought I was being decent by at least being honest. So the texts continued, and I figured they were eventually going to stop because it was a first date. How can someone be so upset over someone not reciprocating on the first date? They did not stop. By the text, you would have thought she ended a 2-year relationship. Then she began calling. At that point, I had to block her number. So Nightmare Tender Girl, please, for the love of everything, let's never ever meet again. This happened to me my freshman year of college. Tinder was new and everyone at my university was on the app. I joined to see what all the fuss was about. Looking through profiles, I found a few guys that were really interesting, and this one guy in particular caught my eye. We'll call him Walter. I swiped right on Walter and we matched. I was excited and kinda giddy because he was super attractive. He messages me and I got butterflies in my stomach. We messaged on the app for maybe an hour. Typical conversation is happening. I asked what he did for a living. He asked what my major was. Harmless conversation. After a while, he asked for my number so we could text and send a message on the app. I gave it to him. He seemed nice enough. We messaged back and forth for a few days. Lots of flirty conversation and plans to hang out finally occurred. By the 4th day of conversation, he started calling me babe, which gave him mixed feelings. It was cute, but also a little weird. We didn't really know each other and had never met. I ignored it and continued on with the conversation. He started saying he wanted to be exclusive and he wanted to see me in person. He was begging me at this point to come to his apartment and cuddle and watch movies with him and his dog. I told him that our first meet needed to be in public. I would not be going to some stranger's apartment. He said I was overreacting and kept begging. I ignored him for the rest of the night. The next day he apologized and said he understood we needed to meet in public, so we made plans that weekend. The weekend came faster than I expected, and it was the day we were supposed to meet. Something felt off and I decided to back out. I texted him apologizing, saying my mom wasn't feeling well and needed me to come home and help her. This made him annoyed, and he said, "Your mom is a big girl. If she needs you, she can call you. Just come over, and you can leave whenever to go help her. I really want to see and kiss you." I told him no, that I would be staying with my mom that weekend, and that was that. I only lived about 30 minutes from home, so I actually did go home to see my mom that day. After what he had said about my mom, I started ignoring him, and the text started rolling in. Text after text. "Babe, I'm so sorry. Please come over. Babe, I miss you. Are you still coming over?" I planned on replying the next day that I was just busy with my mom. He then started calling me. I had a total of 45 missed phone calls within a 2-hour period. He left voicemails saying he was sorry and that he just missed me and wanted me to call him back. Similar voicemails continued the entire time I was home. My roommate texted me shortly after I finished dinner with my mom and asked if we could go out that night. I agreed and went back to my university dorm. Suddenly the calls from Walter started to increase again. More texts, voicemails, and he started messaging me again on Tinder, asking why I wasn't replying to him. I wasn't planning on replying until I got a message on Instagram that said, "Why didn't you tell me you were planning on coming back to town tonight?" Getting this message really freaked me out. I replied to him and said, "Sorry, I've been busy with my mom. How did you know I was back in town?" He said, "Well, I checked your Tinder, of course." Tinder doesn't tell you exact location, but has a within 1 mile message. This really freaked me out, and I messaged him back and said that he was being really creepy. He seriously had to be constantly refreshing my profile to see the distance change. The messages, calls, and voicemails continued. All were him apologizing for making me feel weird about him knowing where I was. He was just, quote, worried about me. We had been texting for less than a full week. I told my roommate about it, and so we decided to stay in that night. The last straw for me was getting a message saying, "Look, I'm really sorry. I'm outside your dorm with flowers and chocolates. Please come out and forgive me." Oh, hell no. I called campus security and told them about the guy, and they never found anyone waiting outside of my doors. I'm assuming he was in his car waiting for me to reply. I blocked him on all socials, phone number, deleted Tinder, and have never been back since. I've seen him once out and about in the town, but he never recognized me, thankfully. Walter, if you're reading this, I'm glad we never met. Thanks for making me second guess every single guy I find attractive. This story begins with a plain evening scrolling through Tinder and swiping right on people I found interesting or cute. One of the matches I got started to immediately talk to me. The person was fairly good looking and, he seemed normal at first. He happened to go to the same university I did. He was an engineer student and I was a designer student, and we had the same campus. We hadn't met before. We were talking a lot that evening. I was bored, so of course I had to talk to him. I found out he also went to the same gym as me, which was the school gym on our campus. I was surprised I didn't recognize him since the gym was small and usually you start recognizing people there. The next day he messaged me and I didn't notice the message right away, so he had messaged me twice during 2 hours. I didn't think much of this at the time, but now I realize that they were the first signs of him becoming a bit pushy. Well, you'll understand later on. I just thought that maybe he was a bit too excited to talk to me. The day was a bit busy for me, so I couldn't message him as actively as the day before. He seemed a bit bummed about that, but I thought everything was still fine. Some days go by. I suddenly get a message from him complimenting my ass at the gym. First of all, I didn't see him at the gym, or maybe I didn't recognize him. Second, why the hell would you have a few days without messaging me and then just randomly send me shit like that? And third, just what the hell? Well, obviously I was a bit weirded out by this message and didn't really know what to say. For him, my replies didn't seem good enough because I didn't like his message. He kept to the weird messages going and started saying inappropriate stuff like, maybe tomorrow you could squat more. In my mind, this quote normal guy just suddenly turned into this weirdo, and I wasn't sure what the behavior was. I told him I didn't appreciate his behavior. His replies started getting more and more passive aggressive, and he just kept saying that he wanted to meet and was so pushy about it. I finally had enough and just deleted him as a match, cause I found him so weird. A year goes by, or I don't know, maybe even more than a year. I don't remember exactly, but I remember the moment when I got a random message on WhatsApp from an unknown number. It was a plain hello with some emojis. I replied to this person asking who he was. He said his name, but at first I didn't recognize that this person was the same creepy guy from over a year ago on Tinder. I asked him where he got my number, and he claimed that I had shared my number with him on Tinder. Like, what? I don't share my phone number that easily, so no way. I stopped replying to him because I already recognized his profile picture and realized that it was the guy that was talking to me over a year ago and was being so creepy. I screenshotted the conversation and the creep's photo to my friends and basically shared my feelings about how weirded out I was with him. Well, it went even creepier. One of my friends in the group conversation is a sexual assault victim. She recognized the person. That creepy dude from Tinder was the one who did it to her, and now he's talking to me. So in conclusion, my good friend's rapist searched my number, tried to lie about the way he got it, and was talking to me after being rejected a year ago. I was so creeped up about this and told my father about this guy. I gave his number to my father and basically haven't heard from this creep ever again. I think my father told him to back off, but I'm not sure how and in what way, to be honest, but I don't care. I'm just glad a creep rapist isn't trying to approach me anymore. I switched my gym after this incident and also happened to graduate. Thank God. I'm not sure if I would recognize him on the street or in person at all. I'm just so glad I never met him. So yeah, anything can happen. You can match with your friend's rapist one day. Great. Let me start by stating that I, 24 female, downloaded Tinder to see what it was all about. I didn't put too much thought into it. I never took it seriously. Most of the things I do are for shits and giggles. I never take anything seriously. I think I tend to forget the internet is not a game, and there are real life people behind the screen. I get on the bus back home after a long day of running errands. I sit down, and from the corner of my eye, I notice a heavyset man staring at me. I'm used to being stared at, so I ignore him. Also note, my Tinder account has been officially terminated months ago. I sneeze. He said bless you. I said thank you. He was a heavyset guy with full hair, green eyes, and an olive complexion. He then hands me a tissue. It's clean, don't worry. And then he gives me a piece of gum. 5 gum to be exact. I say thank you and throw it in my backpack. 1 mile, he said. Based on how he speaks, I think he might be a little on the special side. His voice was low and slow. I'm like, huh? He says, 1 mile. That was on your Tinder. It said you were 1 mile away. I recognize you. We talked for a bit, but then you stopped chatting. He then gives me one of those chocolate balls that are wrapped in like red fancy wrapper. I don't know what they're called. I then giggled and told him I had deleted my account. To be honest, I don't even remember chatting with this guy. I would just swipe right on any and everybody because, like I said, I was just on Tinder for goofs. He asked me repeatedly for my number, and I gave it to him because I'm really bad at rejecting people in person. He immediately called me to confirm it was my number. At this point, I got off at a different bus stop close to my home, but not too close, and sped walked my ass home. I threw his candies in the trash and blocked his number. Long story short, no more Tinder trolling for me. I'm not sure if I can post his real picture on here, but I do have his real face in a selfie he sent me. If I'm allowed to do it, let me know in the comments, and please tell me how to do it. I've had some stories taken down before because they apparently sound like I made them up or something. I'm just not good at explaining things. If it sounds weird, just bear with me because I have autism and I'm doing my best. I promise this is still happening and I don't know what to do anymore. I need some advice. So anyways, let me start at the beginning. One day I was on Instagram and I noticed this follow request. I'm set to private, so people who want to follow me have to request me. I see that this guy is really cute, so I accept. At the time, I was talking online with a guy I met on Tinder, so when the man from Instagram DM'd me, I ignored it. The guy from Tinder ended a couple of days later, so I messaged the Instagram guy back. He told me that he was in love with me and to text him on WhatsApp. I agreed and downloaded the app. We started talking and he seemed like a really cool guy, not to mention that he was really freaking attractive. A couple of days went by and we were getting sexy on the app and I sent him some pictures of my upper half. He never sent any back, which annoyed me, but whatever. At this time, I was living alone in an apartment and taking the bus to go to places. At one point, he told me he needed this game card worth $100 so he could download Skype so he could video chat with me. P.S. He never video chatted with me, and I was just like, hell no, are you kidding me? I'm not buying you that. After an hour of pestering me, he convinces me to take the bus to Best Buy and buy it for him. Not even 5 minutes later, he says he needs another one for $20 because the first one wasn't enough. I get pissed, but he talks me into buying it. The way I sent it to him was scratching off the part with the code and sending him a picture of the code through the app. Now I have to admit at this time my gut feeling was making me feel sick because it was so strong telling me that something was wrong and he was a love scammer. I ignored the gut feeling because every other time I had a gut feeling, it was always just me being paranoid. So I thought it was that again. Wrong. A couple days later I get off work and walk up to Target to get a coffee while waiting for my bus. And he texts me saying he needs a $50 card for something I don't remember. I buy it for him and tell my mom it was groceries. I know, it was stupid. I thought he loved me. I take the bus home and that was that. I'm going out with him by this point and at this time I've sent him over 10 photos of me. He apparently saved them. More on that later. So the next day I wake up to a text from him explaining that he wants to marry me. All this time he's been planning a trip to come see me. P.S. This trip also never happened. He gives me an email address to the base and I'm supposed to tell them that I'm his fiance. I end up emailing them, but tell them I'm actually his girlfriend. We are not engaged, but in order to actually get engaged, I get an email back, and I need to fill out this form and pay over $600 for it. Even though I thought I was in love with him, I never felt truly in love with him like I did in the past. In every relationship, my heart skips boyfriend-girlfriend love and goes straight to madly in love. It ends up driving the guy away and I get my heart broken, but not this time. I always wondered why he was different, and even though I always said I love you, Tim, I didn't truly feel it like I had in the past. This $600 was my breaking point. I FaceTime my sister because I go to her for everything. If anyone will always know what to do or say, it's her. She's my best friend. So I explain the situation and she lets me know, gently, that he indeed is a love scammer and I need to end it with him. I feel this feeling of sadness because even though I felt really close to him, I really thought he loved me. She tells me how to end it and what to say, letting him down gently but firmly, and I do. I delete the app and I think that's the end of it. I don't delete my account on the app, just the app itself. Later in that week, I get a text from an unknown number saying, "Hi, how are you?" I had forgotten about this guy, so I had no idea who he was. He tells me his real name, and I tell this person to send me a selfie, so I know who I'm talking to. He sends me a picture, which is a man, maybe late 60s, saying his real name, and I make the connection to the love scammer. I tell him to stop and to leave me alone and block the number. A while later, I get an email from him, and I'd given my email so long ago, I'm still surprised that he remembered it, but he tells me that I hurt him, and if I don't get back with him, he'll post my naughty pictures on social media. I go into panic mode, but my mom tells me not to respond to him because he's probably bullshitting me to get me to respond. I listen to my mom. I kept getting texts from different numbers in different states, all him, after I blocked him. In one text, he told me he was going to blackmail me because I hurt him, and if I don't respond, he is going to post my picture to social media. Friends and family and work people will see it, according to him. I had moved back home with my parents and got a new job that he is unaware of, but I still panic. I save the text and calls from him as evidence, just in case he keeps texting me from all kinds of numbers. Something to know about me: I'm 22 years old, but in a final attempt to regain control, I lied to him, telling him that I'm not only lying about my age and am really 16, but if he does in fact actually post my pictures, he'll be arrested because I'm 16. I say to scare him, and that if he doesn't stop, I will go to the police and press charges on him. He responds, "Go on, if you go to the police, I'll post your picture." So that didn't work. Time for plan B. Apologize to him for hurting him and try to make amends with him. So maybe if I'm on his good side, he'll forgive me and not post them. He says it's okay, but he really is in love with me for real, and he isn't just a scam. He then asks me to send him a $50 card, and I tell him it is out of the question. He says, "Okay, I'll have to post it then." I say to him that not only do I have the right to say no, but that I'm no longer in any kind of romantic relationship with him, and that if I ever did want to help him out, I don't. I have no physical way of getting what he needs. When I tell him that I'm single and that I'm not in a relationship with him, he responds with the word impossible, and I tell him, "Do not contact me again," and block him again. He had told me that if I don't spend the money on him and basically obey his every will, then I don't love him and want to, quote, go for free. And I just roll my eyes and think to myself, go to hell. I blocked him again, and when he messaged me again, I will not be answering him back. I almost forgot to mention that I'd asked him if he was actually going to post them, and he said no because he loves me and he wants me in his life. I feel much better knowing that he's full of shit and that I have nothing to worry about. So anyways, how is he contacting me with all these numbers? He said that the people won't let him out of his base and basically made it clear to me that he has no way of finding me physically, thank God. So he clearly has very strict and limited access to anything there. How is he contacting me with new numbers all the time, and from numbers of different states too? It doesn't sound like he has access to multiple phones. What do? I just hope this all be over. I searched both of his fake and real name on social media, and he doesn't have any. I've been a firefighter/EMT for a few years now. In my first year, my partner and I got dispatched to a fall. Two kids fresh out of high school were out hiking and decided to climb a rock face. One of them fell and was impaled by a stump of a tree. I remember getting where he was and his whole body was trembling uncontrollably. I went to work trying to stop the bleeding as a pool of blood had already formed around the stump, while my partner called dispatch to get a helicopter. This kid looked at me and stuttered out, "Am I going to die?" I told him I was doing everything I could, and I needed him to keep talking. I didn't say anything for about 30 seconds after that. When he finally did say something, it was, "I don't want to die." This kid was within a year or two of my age, and he's depending on me and my partner to keep him alive. That was a moment where I was wondering what the hell I was doing in this profession, and if this was something I could continue doing. The kid didn't make it. The helicopter wasn't available, and even if it was, he would have bled out before it arrived. I ended up in counseling from that call. I'm still here doing the same job, and I still love it. So I was an EMT working the 4 a.m. to 4 p.m. shift. We pick up our rig and get told to post, hang out and wait for a call in a really shitty part of town. I parked behind this shopping center where all of the businesses were closed down due to the lack of people around the general area. There were a lot of trailer parks, really run down apartments and whatnot. I picked this place because the sun was going to rise in an hour or so, and my partner and I both wanted to take a nap until a call came through the radio to us. My partner has no problem sleeping while sitting up straight in front of the ambulance. I absolutely cannot do this, so I went to the back and laid down on the bench and tried to take a nap. The thing about our shitty old ambulance is that you couldn't open the side door from the inside, so I had to get out, go through the side door, not the very back double doors though, and lay down. I left the side door a little bit cracked open for when a call came through so I could jump into the front to respond. About 5 minutes of me laying there and I hear my partner call me, "Hey, dude, you awake?" I say, "Yeah, what's up?" in response. That person over there has been staring at us for a while. Across the street, there was a sidewalk along the side of the park. I could make out a faint shadow of a person. I knew it was someone because I could see their cigarette butt flicker every time they took a puff. The streetlight was super dim, but I could tell that they were there, just staring at us. It was super weird, so we watched them for a bit. After about 5 more minutes of us just watching, the person walks away. We joke about how weird people are, being up at 5 a.m. roaming around some sketchy park. I lay back down and start to doze off. I wake up to my partner saying, "Holy shit, dude." So I pop my head up into the front cabin. The person was standing like 20 feet from our ambulance, dressed in all black, staring at him, eyes locked. I looked at her face, and I shit you not, she looked like the girl from The Ring. She had pitch black straight hair, wearing all black, and very light-skinned. The streetlight made her look like she was white as paper. My partner is absolutely terrified as they've entered some weird sort of staring match. I told him to hop over into the driver's seat and get the hell out of there. He says, "I can't, I'm too scared to move." Shit, well I guess I have to squeeze from the back through this little ass space to get into the driver's seat. I jump up and try to get in the front cabin. It's a tight squeeze because I'm a bigger guy, but I made it through. She apparently takes notice of me moving and starts power walking straight to us. I've never been so freaked out in my life. As she gets super close, I realize she's looking at the side door that I left a little bit opened, just in a crack. I'm thinking, shit, I forgot to close it. I get a good look at her face. She's noticed that door, and I know she's gonna try to get in through it. Maybe she's gonna try killing me? I don't know, but I have to get the hell out. Her whole body is shaking as she gets closer and closer, still staring at my partner. She gets up right next to his window and just stares at us both, right in our eyes. I get into the front without 1 second to spare, start the ambulance, and peel the hell out. We never posted there again. So, I've been a career paramedic, but this happened when I had only been one for like 5 years. This has never left me to this day, and I shit you not, it happened exactly like this. I was driving home on a rural highway one rainy afternoon. It was really pouring, and traffic had slowed down to about 50 miles per hour. I was following 2 vehicles, and we rounded a bend in the road as a small sports car on the opposite side crossed the center line and hit the small SUV that was leading the 3 of us vehicles on the side of the road. I immediately pulled over and called 911. It was a bad one. I got out to check on everyone. There was wailing coming from the SUV on the side of the road. That's always a good thing, because people are breathing. So, I went into the field past the ditch to check on the sports car. There were 2 young guys in the car. The force of the impact had driven the engine to where the front passenger seat would be. The passenger seat was buckled, his crumpled hand grabbing the "oh shit" handle overhead. The entire section of car shoved into the back seat area. The back of the car had peeled away, and so has the passenger's top of his head. His jawbone gutted out raw and jagged. He was clearly deceased, but I felt for a pulse anyways, all while listening to the gasping, ragged, dragging breaths of the driver. No pulse on the passenger. I tried to figure out how to deal with the driver, but there was nothing I could do. The car had literally wrapped around him, and it would take an extraction team to get him out. Listening to his dying breathing, I apologized out loud to him that I couldn't do more. Told him I was sorry to leave him, but others needed my help too. In my heart, I know he'd never make it, so I went to render aid where it was needed. I did what I could for the family in the SUV. Emergency medical people and fire services got to the scene and took over. The entire family had injuries, but all survived. The mother had permanent brain damage and lost an eye. But the whole day, those 2 guys in the red sports car stayed in my mind. That night, I was home alone and getting ready for bed, with just the bedside lamp on. And then I heard something in the hallway. It got louder as it came down the dark hallway toward my open door. It was like a thump, drag, thump, drag. I absolutely froze. A broken hand curled around the frame of my doorway, and then that kid from the passenger seat was standing there, busted up just like he was in the car. I'm totally serious. He looked at me, and I can't recall the exact words of what he said, but it was something along the lines of, "Hey, my friend wants you to know he understands. He wants you to know he's okay. We both are. Thanks for trying." He stood there for about a few more seconds, just looking at me, and then he stepped back into the shadows, let go of the door frame, and I listened to him drag back down the hallway into nothing. I turned on every damn light I could. I slept with the lights on for 2 full weeks. I clipped out their death notices from the paper later that week. Turns out they were both high school seniors, on their way home from a wrestling tournament. Their car hydroplaned, from what the investigation determined. I'd never have recognized the blonde-headed kid if he had come to me in his healthy, unwrecked self. It freaked me the hell out that he came to me busted up. I still have the newspaper clippings. I'll never forget them, nor the ghostly visit. Anyway, that's my experience. I've seen a lot of shit in my 29-year career, but nothing quite like that before nor since. When I was working at a trauma center, I saw all sorts of unexplainable things, but one of the ones that sticks out to me the most was when a lady came in, passed out drunk, unresponsive, a typical case. We got her into a bed, did vitals, all the usual things that we could do until she could wake up and answer questions. Part of the intake vitals for an alcohol case was to do a EKG to rule out any signs that the behavior could be heart-related. It was just her and I in the room, with the door open, and suddenly she sits up straight, looks me dead in the soul, and says clearly, "You're thinking about quitting." I was, because I was unhappy with my job, and was thinking about leaving the medical field. I told her so, because why not? She says, "You can't quit. People need people like you. I need people like you. You understand things." And then she immediately fell back into the bed, back to her original state. She did not become responsive until several hours later, which she didn't even remember coming to the hospital. Maybe not necessarily paranormal, but I still look back on the moment and can't help but feel a spark of something that was more than normal. Divine, perhaps? I don't know. I always refer to her as the drunken sidekick when I tell the story. So here's my story. Until I moved out last Friday for unrelated reasons, I was living in this basement apartment beneath the TV repair shop. My apartment was connected by a single door to the basement, which was down the stairs from the shop itself. The door opens in toward my apartment and is secured with a chain lock. It's all dark and spooky in there, and is completely empty other than some wood scraps and the water heater. There are no windows, and the only ways in are my door and a trap door up the stairs to the shop. Last week, I was in my living room one night when I heard a loud bang. I looked over and the door to the other basement was open, held in place only by a chain lock. There was no lock on the handle, nor is there a deadbolt. The door had been closed and secured before, and it doesn't open without the knob being turned, so I assumed someone was trying to break in and kicked the door open. I called 911 to report that my house was being broken into. I noted to the dispatcher that I hadn't heard a sound after the door opened. A few minutes later, 3 cops arrived, and I brought them downstairs and showed them the door. They tactically entered the other basement, looking all badass with their guns drawn and flashlights out. One of the cops attempted to go up the stairs, but was unable to open the trapdoor to the shop, and he set off an alarm in the process. They told me there was no one in there, and there was no way anybody could have been in there. The upstairs door was jammed. If someone had opened it, then they would have set off the burglar alarm, and apparently it was covered in undisturbed cobwebs. He said, "Man, I totally believe you, and I don't think you're crazy, but you better call the Ghostbusters or something, cause this is beyond us." After he left, I noticed that the door handle was loose, and a big chunk of wood was missing around the tongue of my apartment side of the door. Scary as hell. Honestly, I never believed in ghosts, but this freaked me out big time and I can't figure out an explanation. Luckily, I moved out 2 days later. Someone tell me what the hell happened, please. So this event happened approximately a week ago. I was going to post this in, but I wanted to let this digest a bit and not post a knee-jerk reaction. I'm a police officer in a city of about 30,000 people. I'm currently assigned on our midnight shift, working hours of 10 p.m. through 6 a.m. At the beginning of my shift, I'm called to a house in what can be described as the wealthiest part of town. I'm told by a dispatch that the resident of the house, a teenage girl, believes that an adult male is attempting to enter her home. I activate my lights and sirens, and I arrive at the home a short time later. I knock on the door and make contact with the caller, a frantic 18-year-old girl. My sergeant arrives on the scene a short time later. I asked her to describe what happened. She explains that while laying on the couch, she heard pounding on the front door. She then looked out the peep and didn't see anyone. She then heard banging on the back sliding glass door and screaming coming from outside. Again, she did not see anyone. We ask if anyone made entry into the home. She says no. My sergeant and I check the area, finding no footprints in the yard. We also check the dew in the grass, finding it to be undisturbed. We also checked the glass for fingerprints, and were unable to locate any. We chalked it up to the girl's friends playing a prank on her, or having an active imagination, and leave the house. Approximately 3 hours later, we are called back to the residence. We are notified that the female believes someone to be in the home this time. I beat my partner to the house by approximately 3 to 4 minutes. I entered and began to start speaking to the woman, who was visibly shaken. I'm told that she was awoken by more banging and a man saying, "I know you're in there." The woman states that she had barricaded the basement door with a chair, as she believes someone could easily enter the home through the attached garage. I tell her to stay put in the living room and go search the basement and garage. I draw my firearm and search the basement. During my search, I feel very uneasy as if I'm being watched, and complete my search as my partner arrives. I walk back upstairs and meet with her and tell her that I haven't cleared the rest of the home yet. She draws her weapon and helps me search the rest of the home. The last room we enter belongs to the woman, and it is her bedroom. Inside the bedroom we find a Ouija board in plain view. We deem the residence safe and go back to the living room. At this point, the woman is shaking frantically and crying. We ask her if she lives alone. She states that she stays with her grandparents. She also states that they are out of town on business. She states that she is frequently home alone due to her grandparents being out of town. I ask her to call and speak with her grandpa. I speak with him and learn that the woman does not have any mental issues, nor behavioral issues. The woman also does not have any form of drugs that he knows of besides nicotine. Grandpa states he is going to call another family member to come look after the woman. We speak with the woman again, learning that she does not currently suffer from mental health issues. The woman also advises us that she found the Ouija board that day hidden in a closet of her home. She also asked if we would take her somewhere else. My partner, being a female officer, transported the woman back to our HQ, where she was picked up by a family member at a later time. I stayed at the home and searched the surrounding area. I did again not locate any signs of a person being outside the home. I don't know if this is the right place to post this, but I believe this girl may have experienced something. I for sure did not feel good while being in the basement. I used to be a big skeptic of the paranormal until I took this job. However, I have experienced and dealt with multiple things I could not explain in regards to call to service. My partner also stated she felt really uneasy while being in the house. Anyone think she may have stumbled across something paranormal? Or did we just feed into some paranoia of a young girl who is home alone? Unfortunately, I've not been called out to the home ever since, so I've not got to investigate into this occurrence any further. Thank you for listening to my experience, and thank you for all your time. I'm a 911 dispatcher, and these are two of my stories I have. I once answered a call. Two brothers were arguing over drinks. One of their girlfriends or wives were over. Anyways, the brothers were drinking heavily, and one pulls out a gun and shoots the other. When I received the call, I could barely get the guy's address over him screaming to send the paramedics. He keeps shouting, "Where the hell are they?" while I am trying to calm them down and give them CPR instructions, and tell him to tell the female there to stop the bleeding, firm pressure to the wound. The medical team cannot go on the scene until the police have secured the firearm. Listening to the pain in someone's voice while they are screaming for help kinda haunts you. Both of them are around 30 years old. I could not imagine killing another family member. I got another story. The next call I got was later in the night, probably around 11:30 p.m. A female calls me screaming. She's yelling, "I'm burning!" So I told her to stop, drop, and roll, and once the flames were out, I told her to turn on the hose and put the cool water on her until the paramedics get there. Once she was a little calmer, I was able to learn about what happened. So, she had been drinking with her boyfriend, and she got depressed and decided tonight was the night she was going to commit suicide and kill his girlfriend. So in his intoxicated state, he found a gas can and started dumping it on himself and his girlfriend and lit them both on fire, and also managed to catch the house, fence, and yard on fire. Both of them survived. He got the worst of the burns. The house and the fence had minimal damage.